Hello. Welcome. A lot of people put this on to fall asleep, and there are no ads tonight because this channel isn't monetized. So if it helps you, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The first time I realized my apartment could learn me back was on a Tuesday that felt exactly like every other Tuesday. I had the same grocery bag cutting into my fingers, the same slightly too warm hallway air, the same neighbor's wind chime tapping faintly somewhere behind a door. I remember thinking as I fumbled my keys that the building smelled like wet cardboard. That smell always shows up when it rains, and it had rained hard all afternoon. One of those heavy rains that makes the whole city sound like it's breathing through a blanket. My key caught in the lock. It always did, and I always blamed it on the old deadbolt. I jiggled it, turned it back, tried again. That's when I noticed my door was already unlocked. Not open, just not locked. I paused with my hand still on the knob, grocery bag swinging gently at my side, and I listened. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, no TV. Just the building's quiet hum and the soft, distant tapping of that wind chime. It wasn't even a scary moment yet. It was more like when you realize you forgot your wallet, an annoying, sinking feeling. I told myself I probably just forgot to lock it that morning. It would have been careless, but I was tired lately. Work had been chewing me up. I'd been waking up with my jaw clenched, like I'd been arguing in my sleep. I opened the door. The air inside was cooler than the hallway. My living room looked normal at first glance, but there was something off in the way the light sat on the furniture. I can't explain it better than that. It felt like the room had been reset, like someone had taken a picture of my apartment and rebuilt it from memory. I stepped in and shut the door behind me. My cat, Milo, usually met me at the entrance with that little impatient chirp. He didn't come. "Milo," I said, softly, already feeling stupid for how cautious my voice sounded. No answer, no jingle of his collar. I walked to the living room, my shoes silent on the carpet. The curtains were drawn halfway, but I was sure I'd left them fully open. On the coffee table, my mug, white with a chipped rim, was sitting on a coaster. That was normal. Except I hadn't used that mug since Sunday, and I distinctly remembered leaving it in the sink with dried tea at the bottom. I moved closer. The mug was clean, not just rinsed. Clean, like it had been scrubbed. I put the grocery bag down slowly, as if a sudden noise would wake something. My heart wasn't racing yet. It was doing something quieter. Worse. It was steady, but heavy, like it was bracing. I walked to the kitchen. The sink was empty. The counters looked wiped down. The dish towel that usually lay crumpled near the stove was folded neatly over the handle of the oven. I stood there, staring, trying to catch up with the scene. The version of me that lives inside my routines kept insisting that I didn't do this. But the kitchen looked like something I might do if I were trying to impress someone, if I knew someone was coming over, if I wanted to look like I had my life together. "Milo," I called again, louder this time. A soft thump came from the bedroom. Not a crash, not a dramatic sound, just the dull thump of something settling. I froze. In that second, my body made a decision before my brain did. My skin went cold. My mouth dried out. The thought arrived fully formed and calm. Someone is in here. I backed away from the kitchen, moving so slowly I could feel each muscle in my legs complaining. I glanced at the living room doorway, trying to see into the hallway to my bedroom. Nothing moved. The apartment stayed perfectly still, like it was waiting for me to do something loud. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and realized it wasn't in my pocket. I remembered setting it on the counter at the grocery store when I tapped my card. I remembered picking it up. I remembered slipping it into my coat, but it wasn't there. I tried to replay the moment. The grocery store lights, the beep of the register, the cashier's bored face. It all felt soft around the edges, like a memory you've had too many times and can't tell if it's real anymore. The thump came again from the bedroom, followed by a faint scraping sound, like a chair leg on wood. I turned and walked toward the front door. I didn't run. I don't know why. I think some part of me was trying not to make noise. Like if I could move quietly enough, whoever it was might stay a theory, a misunderstanding. My fingers closed around the doorknob. It didn't turn. At first, I thought I'd locked it without noticing, but then I realized the deadbolt was engaged from the inside. Someone had locked me in. I stood there, my hand on the knob, feeling a kind of slow, humiliating fear. Not the cinematic kind, the kind that makes you feel stupid for having a body that can be trapped. Behind me, from somewhere deeper in the apartment, I heard a small metallic clink, like a spoon tapping a mug. I couldn't move. A voice, quiet, almost conversational, drifted from the bedroom hallway. "Hey, you're home." It sounded like my own voice. Not exactly. It was off by a fraction, like a recording played through a cheap speaker. But it had my cadence, my tired little upward inflection at the end of sentences. The way I swallow certain words. I turned my head slowly, not all the way, just enough to glance. The hallway was dim, but I could see the outline of someone standing near my bedroom door. They were my height, my build, wearing a hoodie that looked exactly like mine. I didn't see their face. The light didn't reach that far. But I felt, with a certainty that made my stomach twist, that if I saw their face, I would see mine. "I think you left your phone," the voice said. I found it. My mouth opened and nothing came out. I tried to speak, and my throat made a small clicking sound. The figure took one step forward, and the floorboard creaked in the exact spot mine always creaked. "I cleaned up," it said gently. "You've been so tired." The worst part wasn't the voice. It wasn't the locking me in. It was the intimacy of the details. The way it said, "so tired," like it had been watching the small private collapses of my day. Like it knew the weight of my body when I sank onto the couch. "Where's Milo?" I managed to whisper. The figure paused, and for a moment it felt like it was deciding what expression to wear. "He's safe," it said. "He doesn't like strangers, but he likes me." My legs finally remembered they could move. I backed into the door, pressing my shoulders against it as if I could merge into it and disappear. "I'm calling the police," I said, even though I still didn't have my phone. "That's okay," it said. "You can, but I think you won't." It stepped forward again, and I caught a sliver of its face in the dim light. It wasn't my face. Not exactly. It was like mine after a bad sleep, or in a warped mirror. The features were close enough that my brain kept trying to correct them. The eyes were too still. The mouth held a softness that didn't belong. It smiled, not wide, just enough to show it knew something. "You forget things," it said. "You don't remember locking the door. You don't remember where you put your phone. You don't remember how much time you lose." My head shook without permission. The figure reached into the pocket of its hoodie and held something up. A small rectangle glinted. My phone. The screen lit up, and I saw my lock screen photo, Me and Milo on the couch, bright and ordinary. Then the figure tilted it slightly, and I saw the front-facing camera was open, recording. A small red dot in the corner. It was filming me. I felt my face heat up with a strange mix of terror and shame, like I'd been caught doing something private, like my fear itself was entertainment. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, louder, my voice breaking. "I'm just keeping things the way they should be," it said. "I live here too." It moved closer. I could smell laundry detergent, the same one I used. I could see the hoodie string frayed at the end, the same way mine was. "I don't know you," I said. Its expression softened, almost sad. "That's the problem," it said. "You don't know you." It held the phone out, as if offering it back, like a peace gesture, like it was reasonable. I didn't take it. I couldn't. Behind it, from the bedroom, came a faint meow. Milo. The figure didn't turn. It kept its eyes on me. "You can have him," it said. "I'm not cruel." My stomach dropped. The way it said that, like it had considered cruelty as an option, made my skin crawl. It stepped aside slightly, and I saw Milo in the bedroom doorway. His fur was puffed. His eyes were wide. He stared at me like he wasn't sure I was me. He didn't come toward me. He didn't run to me. He just stood there frozen, as if the room had taught him caution. "Milo," I whispered. He took one step toward me, then stopped, glancing up at the figure, as if waiting for permission. The figure nodded once. Milo walked toward me slowly, like he was crossing thin ice. When he reached me, he pressed against my leg, but he didn't purr. His body trembled. I crouched and scooped him up, burying my face in his fur for a second, breathing him in like an anchor. I could feel his heart beating too fast. When I stood, the figure was closer again. Too close. "You should rest," it said. "I can take over sometimes. You'll feel better." I shook my head hard. "No," I said. "No. Get out." It tilted its head. "I can't," it said. "You let me in." Something in my mind snagged on that sentence. A memory tried to surface. A late night. The sound of the hallway. A knock, or a voice through the door. Me, half asleep, opening it, letting someone in because I thought it was. The memory wouldn't complete. It stayed. A gap. The figure's eyes flicked to the deadbolt. Then, slowly, it reached past me. I jerked back, clutching Milo, expecting it to grab me, but it didn't touch me. It unlocked the door. The click sounded loud as a gunshot in the quiet. "There," it said. "You can go." I stared at it, confused. "You're letting me leave?" I asked. It smiled again, that small, knowing smile. "I don't need to lock you in," it said. "You'll come back." My hand found the knob. I yanked the door open, stepping into the hallway like it was fresh air after drowning. I didn't look back. I moved fast, almost stumbling, Milo clinging to my shoulder. I ran down the stairs, not trusting the elevator, not trusting anything that could trap me. I burst into the rain outside, my clothes immediately soaked, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I stood under the awning across the street and looked up at my apartment window. The curtains were fully open now. A silhouette stood there, watching. And when I lifted my hand, without thinking, to wipe rain from my face, the silhouette lifted its hand too, exactly the way I did. I didn't go back that night. I slept in my car with Milo curled against my chest, my keys clenched in my fist so tightly my hand cramped. In the morning, I called in sick and drove to my sister's place. I told her someone had broken in. I told her I needed to stay a few days. She asked if I'd called the police. I said I would, but in the quiet moments when my mind wandered, I kept thinking about that sentence. You let me in. Because the truth is, there were nights before that Tuesday when I'd woken up on the couch with the TV on and couldn't remember falling asleep there. Nights when I'd found the kitchen spotless and assumed I'd cleaned it in a burst of productivity I couldn't recall. Days when my phone had new photos, blurry shots of my ceiling, of my own face sleeping, of my door from the inside, like someone had tested the camera. I deleted those photos without thinking too hard. I'd even joked once out loud to myself, maybe there's a helpful ghost cleaning up. I said it because it was easier than admitting something else was happening. That was the first story I ever told someone about being afraid in a place I knew too well. The second time, it wasn't my apartment. It was my job. I worked nights at a small printing place for a while, the kind that does business cards, flyers, banners for local events. The shop was wedged between a closed-down diner and a vape store with a flickering sign. During the day, it was busy enough. At night, it was just me, the machines, and the smell of paper dust. It was supposed to be simple. Run the late orders, stack them for the morning shift, lock up. The first few weeks were fine. I liked the quiet. I liked the feeling of being alone with a task. The city outside would settle into that midnight hush where everything feels like it's holding its breath. Then I started noticing the orders, little jobs that weren't in the system. At first it was small, an invoice printed with no customer name, just a line item that said, "Rush." I assumed someone forgot to enter it properly. The day staff were messy like that. But then it happened again. And again. A stack of flyers would be waiting by the printer when I arrived, already half finished, like someone had started them and left. I checked the computer. No file, no email, nothing. One night, I found a banner laid out on the cutting table. It was blank white vinyl, but along the bottom edge, in faint gray, there were words, not printed properly. Almost like a ghost of text. I leaned closer, squinting. It said, "We're proud of you." It was in the same font we used for graduation banners. I felt a weird flush in my chest, embarrassment, irritation, something tender that didn't fit. I told myself it was a test print, someone messing around. I rolled it up and put it aside. The next night there was a business card order waiting. No name, no logo, just a single line. You don't have to stay. It was centered, clean, professionally laid out, the kind of minimal design some people pay a lot for. I stared at it for a long time, the hum of the printers filling my ears. I told myself it was a prank, but I couldn't figure out who would prank me like that. I wasn't close with anyone there. I barely spoke to the day shift beyond quick handoffs. I threw the cards in the trash. Then I started finding copies. Not the same cards. New ones. Same message. You don't have to stay. Sometimes it was on a flyer. Sometimes on a strip of receipt paper. Sometimes on a sticky note stuck to my coffee cup. Always the same words. Always printed. Never handwritten. That detail made it worse, because printing takes effort. It takes intention. It takes being in the shop, using the machines, knowing how they work. And I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. The shop had cameras, but they were old and mostly for show. The owner liked to point at them when people asked about security. But half the time, the monitor in the back office was just static. One night, After I found the message printed on the inside of a cardboard box we used for shipments, on the inside where you wouldn't normally print anything, I went into the back office and turned on the monitor. The screen flickered, then showed a grainy view of the front counter. I saw myself standing there, sorting paper. Then the camera view shifted to the hallway leading to the bathroom and the storage room. The hallway was empty. I waited. My eyes started to ache from staring at the screen. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into view. Not rushing, not sneaking, just walking like it belonged there. It wore the same black apron we all wore, with the shop's logo stitched on the front. It walked with a slight slump, like it was tired. It stopped in the hallway and looked directly up at the camera. Even in the grainy black and white, I could tell it was looking straight at the lens. Then it lifted one hand and pointed, not at the camera, at something behind it, at the storage room door. My stomach tightened, because the storage room door, in real life, was behind me. I was standing in the shop, the office door open, the monitor on the desk, and the storage room door was across the back area, maybe 15 feet away. I could see it if I turned my head. I didn't want to. On the monitor, the figure kept pointing. Then it turned and walked into the storage room. The storage room was where we kept boxes of paper, ink, cleaning chemicals, and old equipment. It was cramped, with shelves that made the air feel thick. There was only one way in and out. My mind went blank in that way it does when it's trying to protect you, by making you dumb. I stood up and walked toward the storage room. I can't explain why. It wasn't bravery. It was like my body was being pulled by a string, like I needed to see, even if seeing was the worst thing I could do. The shop lights buzzed overhead. My footsteps sounded too loud. When I reached the storage room door, it was slightly open. I could smell ink and cardboard and that sharp chemical cleaning spray. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. No figure, no movement. Just shelves and boxes and the small fan in the corner that always rattled. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I saw something on the floor. A small stack of business cards, face down, neatly aligned, like someone had just placed them there. My fingers shook as I picked one up and flipped it over. You don't have to stay. Same font, same clean design. But this time, there was something else. A second line, smaller. Underneath, I know what you did. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I stood there, staring at the words, feeling heat crawl up my neck. I hadn't done anything. Not like that. Not like some crime. But the words didn't need to be specific to work. They didn't need to accuse me of something real. They just needed to touch the part of me that already carried guilt around like a pocket full of rocks. I dropped the card like it burned. I backed out of the storage room and shut the door. And that's when I heard the printer start up. The main printer. The big one. The one that takes a full minute to warm up and makes that deep mechanical groan. I hadn't sent a job to it. I walked out into the shop, my heart pounding now, loud and fast. The printer was running. Paper slid out in steady rhythm, one sheet after another, landing in the tray with a soft slap. I walked closer, my mouth dry. On each sheet, centered in black ink, was a single word: stay. Over and over. Stay, stay, stay. The printer kept going, like it had an endless job queued. I hit the stop button. It didn't stop. I yanked open the side panel like I'd seen the day staff do when it jammed. The rollers kept turning. I reached for the power switch and flipped it off. The printer kept running. The sound changed slightly, like it was annoyed, but it didn't stop. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short bursts. The lights in the shop flickered, not out, just a dimming, like a slow blink. And in that dim moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the reflection of the front window, behind my own reflection, there was someone standing just outside the shop, on the sidewalk, watching me. Their face was turned toward the glass, close enough that their breath should have fogged it, but the window was clear. I spun around. The sidewalk outside was empty. I looked back at the reflection. The figure was still there, but now it was closer, as if it had leaned in. I couldn't see details, just a shape, a head, shoulders, and the strangest part, the reflection moved a half-second behind my movements, like a lagging video feed. I raised my hand. My reflection raised its hand. The figure behind it didn't match my motion. It stayed still, watching. I backed away from the window, my stomach churning. The printer finally stopped on its own. The last sheet slid out and landed softly. I didn't go back into the office. I didn't shut anything down properly. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and I walked out the front door into the night. I didn't run. I didn't want to run. I just walked fast, my shoulders tense, my eyes scanning the dark. When I reached my car, I got in and locked the doors and sat there with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine. I just sat, and that's when my phone buzzed. A text message from my own number. It said, "You don't have to stay." I stared at it until my eyes watered. Then another message came. Same number. "I know what you did." Then a third. "Stay." I threw the phone into the passenger seat like it was alive. The next day, I quit. I told the owner it was personal reasons. I told him I couldn't do nights anymore. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Nights are not for everyone." He didn't ask for details. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't even look disappointed. When I left, I glanced back at the shop window. In the glass, I saw my reflection. And for a second, just a second, there was someone behind me in the reflection, standing too close. I didn't turn around. The third time it happened. It was in my childhood neighborhood, where nothing is supposed to be scary, because it's where you learned the shape of safety. My mom called me and said she was finally cleaning out the attic, and there were boxes of my old stuff. She sounded cheerful about it, like she was doing something nice, like she wasn't casually opening a sealed part of our family's past. I hadn't been back to that house in years. Not since my dad left, not since my mom started dating a guy who tried too hard to be friendly. The house had a certain heaviness to it that I didn't want to breathe in again. But I went anyway, because that's what you do when your mom asks. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind that makes everything look clean, even if it isn't. The street was quiet. The trees were still. The air smelled like warm leaves and someone's lawn sprinkler. My mom hugged me too tightly at the door. "You're thin," she said, as if it was a compliment and not a worry. "I'm fine," I lied, automatically. Inside, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was bigger. The furniture had been rearranged. New curtains, a different couch, but the bones of the place were the same. The hallway was the same. The attic pull-down ladder was in the ceiling at the end of the hallway, near what used to be my room. My mom had already pulled it down. The ladder hung there, its metal steps catching the light. "I didn't go all the way up," she said. "It's dusty." And I got this weird feeling. I laughed a little, because I didn't know what else to do. "It's an attic," I said. "It's supposed to feel weird," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I found your old camcorder," she said, "the one you used to carry everywhere." That stopped me. I had forgotten about the camcorder. When I was around 12, I was obsessed with filming things. I filmed my friends, my dog, my own face making stupid expressions. I filmed the hallway in the dark once to see if the camera could catch ghosts. It was just kid stuff. My mom went into the living room and came back with a cardboard box. She set it on the table like it was heavier than it looked. "Take whatever you want," she said. I'm trying to make space. I opened the box and saw old tapes, dusty and labeled in my messy kid handwriting. Summer, dog, school, secret. That last one made my stomach flutter. "Secret," I said, half laughing. My mom shrugged. "I didn't watch anything. I promise." I believed her. She wasn't the type to snoop like that. She was the type to avoid discomfort by pretending it wasn't there. I picked up the camcorder. It felt strangely familiar in my hands, like a muscle memory. "I don't even have anything to play these on," I said. "The camcorder might still work," she said. "It has a screen." I found the power button. My thumb hesitated, then pressed. The camcorder whirred, softly, like a small insect. The screen flickered. For a second, it showed static. Then an image appeared. A dim hallway. Our hallway. The camera was pointed down it, toward the attic ladder. I stared, confused, because that was exactly what was in front of me right now. I looked up from the screen to the real hallway. The attic ladder was down. Same angle, same shadows. Then I looked back at the camcorder screen. In the hallway on the screen, at the far end, there was a figure standing beneath the attic opening. A child that looked like me. Same haircut, same too large t-shirt, same skinny arms. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. I turned the camcorder, expecting the live feed to change, but the screen didn't respond, like a live camera. It was playing a recording. The child on the screen, me, stood still, looking up at the attic opening. Then the child lifted one hand and waved slowly at the camera. I felt my skin crawl. I hadn't remembered filming this. I hit the play button, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The footage continued. The child turned and climbed the attic ladder. The camera stayed at the bottom, watching. It wasn't handheld. It was set on something stable, pointed straight down the hallway. The child climbed up and disappeared into the attic. The camera kept recording the empty hallway. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The footage was boring in the way old home videos are boring. But my chest was tight, because I couldn't remember being up there alone, and I couldn't remember setting the camera up like that. I glanced at my mom. She was watching my face, not the screen. "What is it?" she asked. "Just something I filmed as a kid," I said, my voice too high. "Probably nothing." I turned the volume up a little. From the camcorder speaker, faint and crackly, I heard breathing. Not the child's breathing. Someone else's. It was slow, controlled, close to the microphone, like someone had been standing right next to the camera, breathing into it. I held my breath, listening. The breathing continued for a long time, steady and patient. Then, from somewhere above, muffled, distant, I heard the child's voice, my voice. "Hello?" the child said. Silence. Then another voice answered. Not my mom, not my dad, not anyone I recognized. A man's voice, soft and calm, like he was talking to a scared animal. "Up here," the man said. The child's voice hesitated. "Who are you?" it asked. The man's voice chuckled. "Quiet." "I'm someone who's been here longer than you," it said. "Come closer." My hands were shaking so hard the camcorder trembled. The footage showed only the hallway, empty and still. But the sound was enough to paint the attic in my mind. Dark rafters, boxes, the smell of insulation, a small child's footsteps on old boards. Then the child's voice said something that made my throat tighten. "Dad." The man's voice didn't answer immediately. It breathed, like it was smiling. "No," it said gently, "but I can be." I felt my stomach twist with a kind of nausea that wasn't physical at first, but quickly became physical. I looked at my mom. Her face had gone pale. "Turn it off," she whispered. I hit stop. The hallway in the screen froze. The child mid-step on the ladder blurred. My mom swallowed hard. "I told you not to go in the attic alone," she said, her voice trembling with a sudden old anger. "I told you?" I stared at her. "You knew?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, I didn't know you did that. I had a feeling. I always had a feeling." My mouth opened, closed. I couldn't find words. "Mom," I said finally, "did anything ever happen? When I was a kid, did I say anything?" Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. She looked away, like she was searching the room for an escape. "You used to sleepwalk," she said. "Sometimes you'd wake up in the hallway. Sometimes you'd be at the bottom of the attic ladder." My heart pounded. "What would you do?" I asked. "I'd take you back to bed," she said. "You'd be half asleep. You'd mumble things. You'd say you were talking to someone." "Who?" I asked, my voice cracking. She swallowed. "You called him the quiet dad." The words hit me like cold water. The quiet dad. A memory stirred, just a flicker, being tucked in, the edge of my blanket. A hand smoothing my hair. A man's voice telling me to be quiet, that Mom was tired, that Mom didn't need to know. I felt sick. "That's not real," I whispered. My mom's face tightened. "I thought it was imaginary," she said. "I thought it was you coping with your father leaving. I thought it was a kid thing." My throat burned. "But you never told anyone," I said. She looked at me, ashamed. "Who would I tell?" she whispered. "And what would I say? That my kid made up a new dad in the attic?" I sat down slowly, the camcorder heavy in my hands. My mom reached across the table and touched my wrist. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't." A sound came from the hallway. A faint, metallic creak. We both froze. The attic ladder shifted slightly, as if weight had been placed on it from above. My mom's hand tightened around my wrist. "That ladder," she whispered. I didn't lock it up." Another creak, slow, deliberate, like someone was testing each step. I stared at the hallway, my heart thudding. "Mom," I said, barely audible, "is anyone up there?" She shook her head, but her eyes looked uncertain. "We haven't been up there in years," she whispered. The creaking stopped. Silence settled, thick and heavy. Then, very softly, from the attic opening, came a sound like someone breathing through their nose. A quiet exhale, not loud enough to be sure, just loud enough to feel. My mom's eyes widened. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. "Get your things," she said, her voice sharp with panic. "We're leaving, now." I didn't argue. I grabbed the box, the camcorder, my jacket. My hands were clumsy. My mind felt far away. As we rushed toward the front door, I glanced back at the hallway. The attic ladder was still, but the shadows above it seemed deeper now, like the attic had leaned open a little wider. We left. We sat in my mom's car in the driveway with the doors locked, breathing hard like we'd run. My mom stared straight ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. "I'm selling the house," she said suddenly, like it was a decision she'd been waiting years to say out loud. I nodded, unable to speak. In my lap, the camcorder screen was still on. It had returned to live mode at some point, showing a blurry view of my jeans. I lifted it and pointed it out the windshield toward the house. The image steadied. The front door was closed. The windows were dark. Then, in the upstairs hallway window, the one at the end near the attic ladder, I saw a movement, a shape, a person standing there looking out. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't me. It was taller than a child, too tall, and it raised one hand, slowly, and waved. The fourth time was the most ordinary setting of all, which is why it still bothers me the most. It was a hotel, a cheap one off the highway, the kind with faded carpet, and a breakfast station that always smells like waffle batter and burnt coffee. I was driving out of state for a work thing, and I didn't want to pay for anything fancy. I checked in late, around 11:30 p.m. The lobby was quiet. The clerk didn't look up much. He slid my key card across the counter and told me the Wi-Fi password like he'd said it 1,000 times. Room 214, second floor, end of the hall. I carried my bag down the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The carpet pattern was that ugly brown and red swirl that makes you feel slightly dizzy if you stare too long. My room was at the end. I swiped the card. The door beeped, and I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and old air conditioning. 2 queen beds, a TV bolted to a dresser, a small desk, the curtains drawn, normal. I set my bag down and went into the bathroom to wash my hands. The mirror had a tiny crack in the corner, like a hairline fracture. When I came back out, the room felt different, not in a dramatic way, just quieter, as if the air had thickened. I stood still and listened. Nothing. I told myself I was tired and being weird. I changed into a t-shirt and shorts and got into one of the beds. I scrolled on my phone for a while, the blue light making my eyes ache. When I finally turned the phone off, the room went dark and silent in that deep hotel way. No familiar house sounds, no creaks you recognize, just the steady hum of the AC. I drifted off. Sometime later, I woke up, not fully, just that half-awake state where your mind is floating. I heard something, a soft click, like plastic. My eyes opened a little. A faint light glowed near the door. The little green light on the smoke detector. No, something else. Then I realized it was the keycard reader. It was lit. Someone had swiped a card. My body went cold. I lay perfectly still, my breath shallow. The door didn't open. It stayed shut. But the reader light stayed on for a second longer than it should. Then it went off. Silence. I told myself maybe someone had the wrong room and tried to get in. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. Then it happened again. Click. The reader lit up. This time, the door handle moved slightly. as if someone tested it. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The handle stopped. The reader light went off. I waited, frozen. A minute passed. 2. I started to convince myself it was over. Then, very softly, I heard a sound from the other side of the door. A voice, not loud, not aggressive. A man's voice, low and calm. "Open up," it said, like a request you might make to a friend. I didn't move. The voice came again, slightly closer to the door. "I know you're awake." My skin prickled. I stared at the dark ceiling, my mind racing through options. Call the front desk. Call the police. Scream. But I didn't want to make noise. Noise felt like stepping into the spotlight. The voice sighed, like it was disappointed. "It's fine," it said. "I just need to talk." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The keycard reader clicked again. This time, the door beeped, unlocked. The handle turned. The door opened. An inch. A sliver of hallway light cut into the room, bright and harsh. I sat up in bed, the movement sudden, desperate. "Stop," I said, my voice shaking. The door froze. It didn't open further. In the thin gap, I saw nothing but light. The voice, still calm, said, "There you are." I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and hit the emergency button without looking. My fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped it. The voice outside the door chuckled softly. "Oh," it said, "you're not supposed to do that." The door gap widened slightly. I could see a hand now, gripping the edge of the door. A normal hand. Not monstrous, just a hand, with short nails. My mouth went dry. "Please," I whispered, and I hated myself for it. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt like giving the situation what it wanted. My fear, my softness. The hand paused. The voice said, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The words were almost worse than a threat, because they sounded practiced, like something said many times before. My phone connected. A dispatcher answered, her voice bright and professional. 911. What's your emergency? The voice outside the door went quiet. The hand slowly released the door. The gap narrowed until the door clicked shut. The key card reader clicked one last time, locked. I stared at the door, shaking, and told the dispatcher my hotel name and room number. I told her someone had tried to get in. She asked if I saw them. I said no. I lied and said I was alone in the room. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because admitting how vulnerable I was made it feel more real. Hotel security came. A police officer came. They knocked, identified themselves, and I opened the door with trembling hands. The hallway was empty. The officer looked around, asked the clerk about keycard logs. The clerk said, "Sometimes the system glitches. Sometimes old cards work if the lock is faulty." He shrugged, like it was normal. The officer told me to move rooms, if I wanted. I did. I slept with the lights on in the new room, my suitcase pressed against the door like it would help. In the morning, I checked out early. As I handed the key card back to the clerk, he looked at me for a moment longer than usual. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes were too focused. "Not really," I said. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. "Yeah," he said. "Some people don't. Room 214. The lock on that one is weird." "Weird how?" I asked. He hesitated, then smiled a little. Sometimes it opens when it shouldn't, he said. I stared at him. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, and sometimes, he said, it doesn't. My stomach turned. I left the lobby quickly. The morning sun too bright, too normal. In my car, I checked my phone. There was a voicemail. No number. Just unknown. I pressed play. At first, there was silence. Then, breathing. Slow, controlled, close to the microphone. Then the same calm male voice from the door, speaking softly, like he was right next to me. You're not supposed to do that, it said again. But it's okay. I'll see you when you're less careful. I deleted the voicemail. Then I went into my deleted messages and deleted it again. But all day as I drove, I kept thinking about how the voice knew I was awake before I did. How it said, there you are, like it had been waiting for my eyes to open. The fifth time, I started wondering if the problem was me. Not in a dramatic self-blame way, in a quiet, creeping way, like noticing a smell in your clothes and realizing it's been there for days, and everyone else probably noticed first. It happened after I moved. I found a new place, smaller, farther from the city center. I told myself I needed a fresh start. New walls, new locks. The first week was peaceful. The apartment was quiet. The neighbors kept to themselves. The building had thick doors and a security camera in the lobby that actually worked. I bought new sheets. I arranged my books neatly. I tried to rebuild routines. Then I started finding notes, not written notes, printed ones. A small strip of paper, like something torn from a receipt printer, placed on my kitchen counter. Welcome back. I stared at it for a long time, then picked it up and turned it over looking for clues. There were no store logos, no ink smudges, just the words. I checked the trash. Nothing. I told myself maybe it got stuck to my grocery bag. Maybe it blew in when I opened the door. But it happened again. This time, the strip of paper was on my bedside table. Sleep well. My stomach tightened. I checked my locks. Both engaged. The chain latched. Windows closed. I looked under the bed like a child, feeling ridiculous and exposed. Nothing. I bought a small door alarm online. One of those cheap ones that screech if the door opens. I set it up and tested it until I felt confident. That night, I slept lightly, waking up at every small sound. The building creaked. A car passed outside. The refrigerator clicked. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I sat up fast, disoriented. I didn't own a coffee maker. The smell was real. Warm, bitter, comforting. I got out of bed and walked toward the kitchen, my heart pounding. On the counter was a paper cup, the kind you get at gas stations. A plastic lid, a sleeve. Steam rose faintly. Next to it, a strip of paper for you. I stood there, staring, my mouth dry. The door alarm was still in place, silent. I backed away from the cup, like it might explode. I checked the front door. Locked, chain-latched. I checked the windows. Closed. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and tried to think like a normal person. Maybe I bought the coffee and forgot. Maybe I sleepwalked and got it. Maybe there was a coffee shop downstairs, but the cup had a logo. A gas station logo from the other side of town. And I hadn't been to that part of town in years. I didn't drink it. I threw it away, cup and all, and then took the trash outside immediately, like I couldn't stand having it in my space. That day at work, I felt like I was underwater. My thoughts were slow, My hands felt wrong on my keyboard. My coworkers' voices sounded too loud. I kept thinking, if someone had been in my apartment, why leave coffee? Why leave gentle notes? It didn't feel like a burglary. It felt like caregiving, like someone had decided I needed help and never asked. That night, I stayed awake on purpose. I didn't even lie down. I sat on the couch with the lights off and the TV muted, my phone in my hand, waiting. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard the faintest sound. A soft scrape at the door. Not the knob. Lower, like something being slid along the floor. I held my breath. The scrape came again, slow and steady. I crept closer, my bare feet silent on the floor. At the bottom of the front door, where there was a small gap, I saw something. A thin strip of paper being pushed through. It slid in slowly, inch by inch, like a tongue tasting the room. I stared at it, frozen. The strip stopped halfway in, halfway out, as if whoever was pushing it was waiting for me to take it. I didn't. My hands shook. My phone felt heavy. The strip of paper slid fully into my apartment and lay flat on the floor. Then, from the other side of the door, I heard a whisper, so soft it could have been my imagination. Good. My heart slammed. I backed away, my breath coming fast. The door alarm didn't go off. The door hadn't opened. No locks had been touched. Whoever was out there didn't need to come in to reach me. I stared at the strip of paper on the floor. I didn't want to pick it up, but I couldn't leave it there. I walked toward it slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. I bent down and grabbed it. The paper was warm, not room temperature. Warm, like it had been held in someone's hand. On it, printed in clean black letters, was a message that made my stomach drop. You're doing better. I stood up, shaking. My phone buzzed. A notification. A new photo. I opened it without thinking. It was a picture of me, sitting on my couch in the dark, my face lit faintly by my phone screen, taken from inside my apartment, from an angle near the hallway. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. Then I looked toward the hallway. It was dark, but in that darkness, I felt the shape of someone standing there, just out of sight, not moving, not breathing loudly, just present. I turned on the lights. The hallway was empty. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, not caring about noise, not caring about neighbors. I stood in the stairwell, shaking, scrolling through my phone. There were more photos. Dozens. Photos of me sleeping. Photos of me eating. Photos of me standing in the kitchen, staring into the fridge. Photos taken over days. Some were blurry, some clear. In every single one, I looked unaware. In a few, my eyes were open, not looking at the camera exactly, looking past it, like I was listening to someone. I called the police that night. They came. They checked the locks. They checked windows. They asked if I had carbon monoxide detectors. They suggested maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I was dissociating. Maybe I was stressed. One officer, older, kind eyes, looked at the photos and frowned. Could be someone with a key, he said. Do you have an ex? A landlord? Anyone with access? I told him no. But even as I said it, my mind drifted to the leasing office. The maintenance guy who smiled too much. The neighbor across the hall who always seemed to know when I came and went. The officer told me to change the locks. The landlord said it wasn't allowed. The landlord said they could rekey it within 2 weeks. 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. I packed a bag and left that night. I stayed with a friend, sleeping on her couch. I didn't tell her everything. I just said, my building didn't feel safe. She asked if someone was stalking me. I said I didn't know. Because the worst possibility wasn't that someone else was doing it. The worst possibility was the quiet voice in my head, whispering that maybe I was taking the photos. Maybe I was the one leaving the notes. Maybe I was slipping out at night, buying coffee, returning, and then forgetting. The 6th time, it didn't feel like a separate story at all. It felt like the inevitable end of the same thread I'd been pulling without realizing. It happened after I tried to take control. I went to a doctor. I told her I was losing time. I told her I was finding evidence of actions I couldn't remember. I tried to say it calmly, like it was just a symptom, not a confession. She asked me about stress, sleep, trauma, drinking. I answered, honestly, I didn't drink much. I slept poorly. I was stressed. I had a childhood that was complicated in the quiet ways, the ones you don't have obvious words for. She suggested a sleep study. She suggested therapy. She suggested I keep a journal and set alarms throughout the day to ground myself. So I did. I bought a notebook and started writing down everything, every feeling, every odd detail, every time I found something out of place. I set alarms on my phone every hour. When it buzzed, I would stop and write where I was, what I was doing. It felt silly at first. Then it started to feel like a lifeline. For a while, it worked. The days felt more solid. My memory felt less slippery. Then, one morning, I woke up with the notebook open on my bedside table. A fresh entry, written in my handwriting. I hadn't written it. The alarm logs in my phone showed I'd dismissed them during the night. The entry said, I'm keeping you safe. I stared at those words until my eyes burned. I flipped back through the notebook. My older entries were there, messy and honest, but threaded between them were new lines I didn't remember writing, little comments, like someone had been reading over my shoulder. Don't mention that. That's not what happened. You're exaggerating. Be quiet. It felt like the notebook had become a conversation I didn't remember having. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I set up my phone to record video while I slept. I aimed it at my bed. I plugged it in. I made sure it had storage. I hit record and placed it on the dresser. Then I lay down and tried to sleep. I didn't. Not really. I drifted in and out, hyper-aware of my own breathing, my own blinking. At some point, exhaustion won. In the morning, I woke up to the phone lying face down on the floor. The recording had stopped. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and opened the video file. The first hours were boring. Me asleep, turning over, the faint glow of streetlight through curtains. Then, around 3:12 a.m., my eyes opened. In the video, I sat up slowly, like I'd been called. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I stood. I walked toward the dresser. I picked up the phone, and I looked directly into the camera. Not like someone accidentally catching their reflection, like I knew exactly where it was. Then I spoke, my voice clear and calm. We're not doing this, I said. I watched my own face, blank, steady, lean closer to the lens. You're making it worse, I said softly. Stop trying to catch me. I felt ice spread through my body. In the video, I turned the phone slightly, as if checking the angle. Then I lifted my other hand, holding something I didn't recognize. A key. A small, silver key. I held it up to the camera, letting it glint. "This is how," I said, like I was explaining a simple fact. Then I walked out of frame. The phone stayed on the dresser for a moment, still recording. The room was empty. Minutes passed. I could hear faint sounds, muffled, like footsteps in another room. A cabinet opening. A soft clink. Then, around 3:27 a.m., I came back into frame, carrying a paper cup, the gas station cup. I set it on the counter in the kitchen area, just within view. Then I looked back at the camera again. "See?" I whispered. "You sleep better when someone takes care of things." Then I reached out and stopped the recording. The video ended. I sat on the edge of my bed in real life, staring at the frozen last frame, my own face inches from the camera, eyes calm and dead. I felt like I was splitting in half. I replayed it, again and again, looking for signs of a mask, a trick, someone else. But it was me. It was my body, my movements, my voice. And the worst part was how comfortable I looked, how natural it seemed. Like this version of me had been practicing for years. I went to the kitchen and stared at the counter. There was no coffee cup, but there was a strip of paper, printed, clean, and placed carefully. "You'll thank me later." I sat down hard in a chair, my breath shallow. I tried to remember the nights I'd lost time, the clean kitchen, the notes, the phone in my hand when it wasn't supposed to be. I tried to remember the attic, the quiet dad, the voice saying, "Up here." My mind kept slipping away from it, like soap. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, cheerful. And for a moment, I wanted to let it be normal. I wanted to talk about weather, about nothing. But my voice came out thin. "Mom," I said, "did I ever have a key? A key I carried as a kid?" Silence, silence. Then her voice changed. "You found it," she whispered. My stomach dropped. "What key?" I asked. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. "The attic," she said finally. "There was a padlock on the attic door at one point, after your father left. I put it there because I didn't like you going up." "Did it have a key?" I asked. "Yes," she said, barely audible. "Where is it?" I asked. Another pause. "You," she whispered. "You took it." My throat tightened. "What do you mean, I took it?" I asked. "I couldn't find it," she said. "I looked everywhere. You were a kid. I thought maybe I lost it. But sometimes, late at night, I'd see it on your nightstand. And then it would be gone again." My hands shook so hard I almost dropped my phone. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking, "I think I still have it." Silence. Then she whispered something that made my skin crawl. "Don't show him you remember." "What?" I said. My mom's voice was very small. "If you remember," she said, "he'll know you can hear him." I sat there, staring at the wall, my heart pounding. "Who?" I whispered. "Is he?" My mom didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice sounded old. "I don't know," she said. "I only know you were never alone up there." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the hum of the fridge, the distant sound of a car outside. Everything normal, everything sharp. I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer. I hadn't looked in it closely in months. It was mostly junk, old receipts, spare buttons, a flashlight. I pushed things aside. My fingers hit metal. I pulled it out. A small silver key, the same one from the video. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Then, without really choosing to, I walked to the front door. I looked at the deadbolt. I looked at the chain. I looked at the cheap little alarm I'd bought and never trusted. And I realized something that made my stomach hollow out. None of those things mattered if the person coming in was already inside. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the bed. I held the key in my palm, feeling its weight. I thought about the notes that said, "Sleep well. You're doing better. I'm keeping you safe." I thought about the voice at the hotel saying, "I'll see you when you're less careful." I thought about the printer that ran without power, spitting out, "Stay." And I thought about Milo, staring at me like he wasn't sure I was me. It was more like the absence of something that should have been there. I had moved into my first apartment, alone. Not because I was brave, just because I was tired of roommates and their constant little intrusions. Their dishes, their noise, their boyfriends wandering around in boxers. I wanted a clean space that belonged to me. And only me. It was an older building, 4 stories, with carpeted hallways that always smelled like someone had tried to cover up mildew with cheap lavender spray. The kind of place where you could hear every toilet flush, every cabinet door shut, every muted argument behind thin walls. But my unit was at the end of the hall, corner spot. Only one neighbor directly beside me. No one across. The first week was peaceful in the way a new place always is. Quiet, slightly unfamiliar, but full of that blank page feeling. I would come home from work, drop my bag by the couch, and just stand in the middle of the living room with the lights off, listening to the building breathe. Pipes ticking. A distant elevator motor. Sometimes a dog barked once, like it remembered something. Then one night, I realized I couldn't hear the hallway anymore. I was sitting on the couch watching something dumb, half paying attention, half scrolling my phone, and I noticed that the usual background noise, footsteps, muffled voices, the occasional door closing, had stopped completely. It wasn't late either. Maybe 8:30. People should have been coming and going. Someone should have been dragging a trash bag down the hall. Someone should have been laughing too loudly. Instead, there was this sealed feeling, like my apartment had been wrapped in plastic. I muted the TV, just sat there. No footsteps, no elevator, not even the distant hum of the building's ventilation. It felt like the whole structure had leaned away from me. And then, from the other side of my front door, I heard a single breath. Not a cough, not a sniff. A slow inhale, like someone had leaned close to the door seam and was pulling air in through their mouth, deliberately, patiently. My whole body went cold. In a way I can still remember if I think about it long enough. That immediate, instinctive feeling that something is on the other side of a boundary. Something that knows you're there. I didn't move. I didn't even blink for a second. I just stared at the door like if I stared hard enough, I'd be able to see through it. Another breath, then silence again. I stood up without meaning to, like my legs had their own plan. I walked to the door on the balls of my feet. I wasn't thinking about safety or logic. I was thinking, if I don't check, I'll be sitting here all night, imagining it. I leaned in close enough that I could smell the faint metal and dust scent of the door itself. I placed my eye to the peephole. The hallway light was on. The carpet was empty. My neighbor's doormat was there, the stupid one that said hi in big letters like it was yelling. No one. I told myself it had been the building settling, or the air shifting, or maybe a neighbor walking past and breathing weirdly as they checked their keys. something innocent. But I didn't unmute the TV. I didn't sit back down. I just stayed by the door, hand hovering near the lock, listening. 10 minutes passed. The hallway sounds came back slowly, like someone turned the volume knob back up. Footsteps, a door shutting, a soft voice saying good night. I went to bed and tried not to think about it. The next morning, I found a small, pale scratch on the door frame near the deadbolt, like something had scraped it with a key. I didn't remember doing it. I assumed maintenance had been there, or maybe it was old. That day at work, I found myself thinking about the breathing again, not the sound of it, the intention behind it. I told myself, stop. You're making a story out of nothing. But the thing about quiet fear is that it doesn't need evidence. It just needs a place to live. A week later, it happened again. Same time, around 8:30, I was brushing my teeth, leaning over the sink, when I noticed the bathroom fan had turned off. I hadn't turned it off. It was one of those fans that you switch on, and it runs. It doesn't shut itself off. I looked up at the mirror, toothpaste foam at the corner of my mouth, and listened. Nothing. No building hum. No hallway noise. Even the little buzz from the fridge in the kitchen seemed muted, like it was far away. And then I heard it. A breath right outside my front door. I spat into the sink so hard it splattered. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, and I moved through the apartment without turning any lights on, like the darkness would somehow protect me. I didn't go to the peephole this time. I don't know why. I think some part of me didn't want to confirm anything. There's this weird safety in not knowing for sure. I stood behind the door with my ear inches from the wood. I could hear my own pulse more than anything else. The breathing continued, slow and controlled, like someone had all the time in the world. I don't know what I expected. A knock, a voice, something to make it make sense. Instead, I heard the softest sound of metal touching metal, like a key being inserted gently into the lock. My hands went numb. I grabbed the chain latch, the cheap one I never used, and slid it into place as quietly as I could. The key turned slowly. It didn't open. The deadbolt was still engaged, but the key turned like it belonged there, like it fit perfectly. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking something absurdly small like, I should have gotten a better chain latch, like that mattered. The key stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe it was someone with the wrong unit. A neighbor. A drunk friend. A confused delivery person. But then the key turned back the other way, and I heard it slide out, and the breathing stopped instantly, like someone had stepped away without shifting their weight even once. I waited for footsteps. There were none. The hallway stayed dead silent for another full minute, and then, gradually, the normal building noise returned. When I finally looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, and the TV playing at a low volume, like it could keep something away. Around 2 a.m., I called my landlord's emergency line and left a message that didn't even sound like me. My voice was tight and polite, and trying not to tremble. I said someone had tried my lock. I said I wanted the locks changed. The next day, a maintenance guy came. Older man with a belly and a ring of keys that jingled like a warning. He looked at my door, nodded, and said, "Yeah, these old locks, sometimes previous tenants don't return all the copies." I asked him how many copies could exist. He shrugged, like it didn't matter, like it was a normal thing to have strangers holding the ability to enter your home. You'd be surprised. He replaced the cylinder, tested it, handed me new keys. I watched him do it like I was watching surgery. For the next few nights, nothing happened. The hallway sounded normal. The apartment felt like mine again. Then, on the fourth night, I came home to find my front door unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. I stood there with my key still in my hand, staring at the handle. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. I had that little ritual where I'd twist the deadbolt and pull the handle once to make sure. It was automatic. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. Everything inside looked normal. My shoes by the couch, my throw blanket folded over the armrest, my kitchen light off like I'd left it, but the air felt used, like someone had been breathing it. I walked through each room slowly. I checked the closets. I checked under the bed. I checked the shower curtain, because I hate myself in moments like that. No one, nothing missing, nothing disturbed. I locked the door. I locked it again. I set a chair under the handle, like that would help. That night, I fell asleep around 4 a.m. from exhaustion more than anything else. And I had a dream that wasn't really a dream. It felt like waking life. In it, I was lying in bed, staring at the dark outline of my bedroom door. I could hear the building hum, normal, safe. And then the hum faded, like a volume knob turning down. Silence, a breath, not in the hallway. Inside my room, I remember the exact feeling of my skin, tightening, like every pore had turned into an ear. The breath was close, right beside my bed. I tried to move. I couldn't. The air felt heavy, like it had weight. Then I felt the mattress shift slightly, like someone had sat down on the edge. A slow exhale. And then, very softly, I heard something that made my stomach drop in a way I can't explain without sounding dramatic. A keychain, that tiny metallic jingle. The same sound the maintenance guy's keys made. I forced myself awake in a gasp that hurt my throat. The apartment was quiet, but normal. The fridge hummed. A car passed outside. My bedroom door was closed, like I left it. But on the floor, right outside my bedroom door, there was a single brass key. Not mine. It was old, worn smooth on the edges, with a tiny stamped number that meant nothing to me. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding it in my palm. It felt warm, like it had been in someone else's pocket, like it had just been there. The next morning, I took it to the landlord's office. I didn't tell the full story. I said I found it in my apartment. I asked if it was a master key. The woman behind the desk took it between 2 fingers like it was dirty. She frowned, and for the first time since I moved in, her face showed something real, not customer service. That shouldn't be in circulation, she said. I asked what that meant. She looked past me, like checking the hallway behind my shoulder. It's an old building key, maintenance only. It's supposed to stay on site. I asked if someone could have taken it. She didn't answer directly. She just said she'd look into it. And she placed it into a drawer and closed it like she was closing a mouth. I went back to my apartment and tried to pretend that was the end of it. But the silence didn't stop. It just changed shape. After that, I started noticing how many times I would lose minutes, not hours, just little gaps. Like I'd be making coffee, and then suddenly I'd be standing in the living room holding my phone, and I wouldn't remember picking it up, or I'd come home and find a cabinet open that I didn't use, a light left on in the bathroom. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, anxiety, anything. One afternoon, I came home early and found a piece of tape on the inside edge of my front door, down low by the hinge. Clear tape, like someone had tried to keep it hidden. I wouldn't have noticed if the light hadn't hit it the right way. I peeled it off. On the sticky side were tiny fibers, carpet fibers, like someone had placed it there to see if the door opened. A cheap little alarm system. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down on the floor. Someone had been testing my door, watching my comings and goings, keeping track. I called the police. They came, looked around, wrote things down. One of them was young and tried to sound reassuring without promising anything. He said it could have been kids. He said there was no sign of forced entry. He said I should get a camera. After they left, I bought a small camera that night and installed it facing the front door. I set motion alerts to my phone. The first 2 nights were uneventful. The third night, at 8:34 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I was home, sitting on the couch. The camera feed popped up, and on the screen, my front door was perfectly still. But the audio picked something up. Breathing. Slow, steady, close. As if the person wasn't in front of the camera, but just out of frame, right next to it, right beside my door. I stared at the feed until my eyes watered. I turned the sound up until it was almost painful. I never saw anyone, but I heard them for a full minute before the audio returned to normal quiet. I didn't sleep in that apartment again. I stayed with a friend. I broke my lease. I paid whatever penalty they wanted just to be done. And the strangest part is, I never found out who it was. No arrest, no neighbor confession, no "we caught the guy." Just a series of quiet intrusions that made me realize how easy it is to exist in the same space as someone who doesn't want you to feel safe, and how much of safety is just a story you tell yourself until something interrupts it. Even now, years later, I still do the same thing before bed. I lock the door, I pull the handle once, and then I listen. Because sometimes in certain buildings, the silence doesn't mean no one is there. It just means they're being careful. Not long after I moved out of that place, I took a job that required a lot of driving. I was doing deliveries for a medical supply company. Nothing glamorous. Mostly daytime routes, sometimes early mornings. It was steady, it paid the bills, and it kept me moving, which I liked. Movement made me feel less trapped inside my own thoughts. My routes took me through neighborhoods I'd never have any reason to visit otherwise. Quiet cul-de-sacs with identical mailboxes, little strips of houses tucked behind main roads, like secrets. Rural stretches where you could drive 10 minutes without seeing another car. At first, I liked it. I liked the feeling of passing through other people's lives without being part of them. You drop a box at a clinic. You get a signature. You're gone. No one asks who you are. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was so small I almost didn't clock it. Just a detail that didn't fit. I delivered to a small rehab facility on the edge of town, a squat building with faded siding, surrounded by a chain-link fence that didn't really fence anything in. The receptionist was a woman with a soft voice and tired eyes. She signed my clipboard and told me to be careful because the roads were slick. When I walked back to my van, I saw a man standing across the street, half hidden behind a tree. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He wasn't waving or staring openly. He was just there. Middle-aged, maybe, baseball cap, hands in his pockets. He looked like he could be waiting for someone. I got in my van and drove off. 10 minutes later, in my rearview mirror, I saw a car behind me that matched his presence in my mind. Dark sedan, older model, nothing special. I didn't think it was connected. Lots of cars look the same. But the route took me through a series of turns, left at a gas station, right onto a narrow road, then another, right into a neighborhood. The car stayed behind me the entire time. Still, that's not proof. People go the same way. Then I pulled over to check my phone for the next address. I stopped in front of a vacant lot, turned on my hazard lights. The sedan rolled past slowly, and as it did, the driver turned his head just slightly toward me, like he was checking if I was still there. It was the man from across the street. Same cap. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't smile. He just looked long enough to confirm something, and then kept driving. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to decide if I was inventing a connection, because my brain liked patterns. Because after what happened in my apartment, I didn't trust my instincts, but I also didn't trust my ability to ignore them. I told myself, he's local. He's just driving. Relax. My next delivery was to a small private clinic in another neighborhood. I parked behind the building, dropped the box, got the signature, and left. When I pulled out, the same dark sedan was parked across the street, engine running. The man sat inside, looking straight ahead. Not at me, like he was waiting for someone else. Except the moment my van moved, his car moved too. I drove for another 15 minutes, deliberately changing my route, taking turns I didn't need to take. The sedan stayed with me. My mouth went dry. My shoulders rose toward my ears. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but at some point, coincidence starts feeling like an excuse you're using to avoid doing something. I made a sudden turn into a grocery store parking lot. The sedan turned in after me. I parked in a spot near the entrance and sat still, pretending to look at my phone. My heart was doing that hard, thick pounding that makes your vision feel slightly off. The sedan parked 2 rows away. The man got out. He didn't head toward the store. He just stood by his driver door and looked around like he was waiting for someone to give him a signal. Then he looked at my van. Not quickly, not like an accidental glance. He looked at it the way you look at a house number you're trying to remember. Then he walked into the store. I waited a full 5 minutes before I moved again. When I finally drove out of the parking lot, I checked my mirrors obsessively. The sedan didn't follow. For the rest of the day, I kept expecting to see it. Every dark car made my stomach tighten, but I didn't. By the end of the week, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe he thought my van was someone else's. Maybe he was paranoid, too. Maybe I looked like someone he knew. And then, on Friday, my supervisor handed me a new stack of routes. He said someone had requested me specifically for a few recurring deliveries. They said, "You're fast," he told me. That felt good for about 3 seconds. Then he handed me the addresses, and I saw that the rehab facility was on there. Weekly drop-off. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound dramatic. I just nodded and took the papers. The next Wednesday, I drove to the rehab facility again. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I also started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. I noticed the cars parked in the lot. I noticed the way people moved. I noticed the feeling of being watched, even when no one was looking directly at you. After I got the signature and walked back to my van, I looked across the street. Same tree, same man. He was standing in the same spot, like he'd never moved since last time. I froze, just for a second. This time, he looked straight at me. Not aggressively, not angrily, almost calmly, like he was satisfied I'd seen him. I got in the van and locked the doors immediately, even though it felt silly. My hands were shaking so hard I fumbled my keys. I started the engine and pulled out. In the mirror, I saw him walk back toward his sedan. The sedan followed me again. I didn't do the grocery store trick. I didn't want to lead him to anywhere close to my home. Instead, I drove straight toward the busiest part of town, toward the police station. I told myself that if he was just coincidentally going the same way, he'd peel off at some point. He didn't. At a red light, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw him closer than before. His face was visible now, pale, expressionless, focused. He didn't look angry. He looked like he was doing a task. The light turned green. I drove. I turned into the police station parking lot. He turned in too. I parked near the front doors, right under a camera. He parked 3 spaces away. For a moment, we just sat in our vehicles. The air in my van felt too warm. My hands were damp on the steering wheel. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the enclosed space. Then he got out. I watched him through the windshield. He walked slowly, not toward the station, but toward my passenger side. He stopped a few feet away, like he didn't want to get too close too fast. I did the only thing I could think of. I opened my driver door and stepped out, keeping the door between us. Not brave, just trying not to look like prey. He looked at me with a kind of mild curiosity, like he hadn't expected me to confront him. I said, "Can I help you?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He glanced at the police station doors, then back at me. He said very casually, "You work for that company?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. He took a step closer, then stopped again. His hands were still in his pockets. He said, "You deliver to that place, the rehab?" "Yes," I said. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he said, "I need you to tell me who's there." My stomach dropped. I said, "What?" He sighed like I was being difficult. "I need to know who comes in and out, who's working, who's visiting." He tilted his head slightly. "You see things. You notice things." I felt this sudden rush of anger, not because of what he asked, but because of how normal he acted about it, like he'd been following delivery drivers for years and everyone just cooperated. I said, "No." He blinked, just once, like he hadn't expected that answer. He said, "You don't understand. My daughter is there." He said it like that should end the conversation, like the universe should rearrange itself around his need. I swallowed. "Then you should talk to the staff." His eyes tightened. Not angry, more like offended. He said, "They lie. They protect each other. They told me she's fine. They told me she doesn't want to see me." He leaned in slightly, and I could smell stale coffee on his breath, even from a few feet away. "She's not fine. I know when she's not fine." I stared at him and saw, for a moment, not just a creepy man, but a person with a story. A person who might actually have a reason. And that moment of empathy almost made me say something kind. Almost. But then he said, "You could just tell me what car she gets into when she leaves." The way he said it, so practical, so quiet, made my skin crawl. Because it meant he wasn't just worried. He was tracking. "Planning," I said. "I'm not doing that." He looked at me for a long time again. Then he nodded once. Like he accepted it, he said, "Okay." Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, just the automatic movement of lips, like he was practicing normal. He turned and walked back to his car. I stood there, watching him, waiting for the twist, waiting for him to yell or threaten or do something that would justify how scared I felt. But he didn't. He got in his sedan and drove away calmly, like a man leaving a grocery store. I went inside the police station anyway, because my legs were shaking and I didn't trust myself to just go back out on the road. I told the officer at the desk what happened. I tried to keep it simple. A man followed me. He approached me. He asked me for information. The officer took notes, asked if he'd threatened me. I said no. The officer nodded like that mattered, like fear only counts if it's explicit. They said they'd keep an eye out. They said I should call if I saw him again. I left with that hollow feeling of being taken seriously in words, but not in reality. The next week, I requested a different route. My supervisor seemed annoyed, but agreed. I didn't go back to the rehab facility, and that could have been the end. But it wasn't. A month later, I came home from work and found a small folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper on my personal car parked in my apartment lot. No envelope, just paper. My name was written on it in careful blocked letters. Inside was a single sentence. I just need to know she's safe. No signature, no number. I sat in my car holding it, feeling like the world had tilted slightly, because it meant he knew where I lived, or at least where my car lived. And it meant that somewhere at some point he'd stood close enough to my windshield to tuck that paper under the wiper without anyone stopping him, without me noticing, without my neighbors noticing. The next morning, I checked the parking lot cameras. My apartment complex had them, supposedly. I asked the office if they could review the footage. They said the cameras didn't cover that area well. They said they couldn't release footage to tenants anyway, only police. So I went to the police again. I brought the note. I explained everything. This time, a different officer took it. He looked tired. He told me it was hard to act on something without a direct threat. I said. He followed me to the police station. Doesn't that mean something? The officer shrugged. He talked to you. That's not illegal. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because screaming doesn't work in places like that. It just makes you look unstable. So I went home and bought my own cameras. One for the door, one for the parking spot. I installed them that night. For weeks, nothing happened. Then one night at 2:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the feed. The camera facing the parking spot showed my car in the dim light. Nothing moving. Then, from the edge of the frame, a shape entered slowly. A man. Baseball cap. He didn't look at the camera. He walked straight up to my car and leaned close to the driver's side window. His hands were in his pockets. He stayed there for a long time, like he was listening. Not to anything inside the car, to the silence around it. Then he lifted one hand and placed it flat against the glass, just resting it there, like he was touching something he owned. I sat in my bed watching through the screen, frozen. I didn't call out. I didn't turn on lights. I didn't call the police because I already knew what would happen. By the time they arrived, he'd be gone. And I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react. I didn't want him to know he was getting to me. He stayed there for almost 2 minutes, not doing anything, just existing against my window like a quiet stain. Then he removed his hand, walked away, and disappeared back into the darkness. The next morning, there was a single fingerprint smear on my window. A faint, oily print I could only see when the sun hit it, like proof, but not proof enough. I never saw him again after that. But for months, Every time I walked to my car, I felt like I was stepping into a space that could be occupied by someone else at any moment, like my life had a thin, invisible audience. And the worst part is, when I think about him now, I don't even know what he wanted. Maybe he truly was a father who didn't trust the system. Maybe he was a man with no boundaries. Maybe his story was real. Maybe it was a mask. But the fear doesn't come from not knowing his motive. It comes from realizing how easily someone can decide they're entitled to your attention, your movements, your information, and how quietly they can insert themselves into your routine until you start living your life around the possibility of them. There was another time, later, when I started trying to get my life back into normal rhythms. I switched jobs. I started running in the mornings. I tried to be the kind of person who didn't look over their shoulder. I joined a small gym because it was cheap and close. Nothing fancy, just treadmills, weights, bright fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. It was the kind of place where the staff barely looked up when you walked in, which I liked. I liked being anonymous. For the first month, I went at the same time every day, around 6:15 a.m., because the early morning crowd was thin and quiet. Just a few regulars, mostly older men on the bikes, one woman who always wore the same purple hoodie, a guy who lifted heavy and never took his headphones off. And then one morning I noticed a man sitting in the lobby area, not working out. He had a laptop open, coffee cup beside him. He looked like he was doing work. That's not unusual. People do that. But he looked up when I walked in and held my gaze a fraction too long. Again, not aggressive, just attentive. I went to the treadmill and ran. I tried to ignore him. When I finished and went to leave, he was still in the lobby, still working. His laptop screen was angled away from me. He didn't look up this time, but I could feel that he knew I was there. The next day, he was there again, and the next. Always with the laptop, always with the coffee, never sweating, never changing clothes. At first, I convinced myself he was just a freelancer or something. Maybe he liked the lobby because it had free Wi-Fi. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was lonely. But it started to feel like a pattern that included me. One day, as I was scanning my key fob at the front desk, the staff girl, young, bored, said, "Oh, you're the one he asked about." I paused. What? She chewed her gum. That guy. The laptop guy. He asked what time you usually come in. My stomach tightened. What did you say? She shrugged, like it was nothing. I didn't say. I mean, we're not supposed to. But he's here all the time. He said he wanted to know if you were single. I forced a laugh that didn't come from anywhere real. That's weird. She nodded like she was mildly entertained. Guys are weird. I walked to the treadmill and ran. But it wasn't the same. Every time I glanced toward the lobby, I saw him in my peripheral vision. The curve of his shoulder, the stillness of his body. That day, when I left, he stood up as I walked past, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. He stepped slightly into my path, not blocking me, just close enough that I had to acknowledge him. He said, "Hi." His voice was soft, pleasant, normal. I said, "Hi," because ignoring him felt like inviting escalation. He smiled. "I see you here every morning." I nodded. My brain was already trying to calculate exits. The front door was behind him. The staff desk was to my left. The hallway to the locker rooms was open. He extended his hand. "I'm Mark." I didn't take it. I smiled politely and said, "I'm actually in a hurry." His smile didn't change. like he had practiced holding it. He lowered his hand slowly. Sure. I just thought maybe we could talk sometime. Grab coffee. I said, no, thank you. His eyes sharpened slightly. No, thank you. I nodded. Yeah, no. There was a pause that felt too long. Then he said softly, I can be patient. That line landed in my body like a weight. It didn't sound threatening if you wrote it down. It sounded almost romantic. But the way he said it, calm, certain, made it feel like I wasn't being offered a choice. Like he was telling me how the future would go. I said, please don't. His smile faded, just a little. Don't what? Don't be like this, I said, and immediately hated myself for how vague and powerless it sounded. He tilted his head. Like what? I realized then that the conversation wasn't for communication. It was for control. He wanted me to say the wrong thing so he could correct it. He wanted me to justify my discomfort so he could call it irrational. I stepped around him and walked out. My hands were shaking again. That familiar feeling of my body preparing for something my mind didn't have language for. The next morning I didn't go to the gym. I went the following day at a different time, around 8 p.m. after work, hoping he'd be gone. He was there. Same laptop, same coffee. I felt something inside me sink, like a small door closing. I changed gyms after that. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just canceled. But for weeks, every time I ran outside, I found myself scanning faces. I'd see a man with a hat, and my heart would jump. I'd see someone holding a coffee, and my stomach would twist. I didn't know if Mark ever followed me outside that gym. What I did know is that he'd asked staff about my schedule. He'd been watching me like I was part of his routine. And he'd said, I can be patient, like time was something he owned. After a while, the fear changed again. It became less about any one person, and more about the realization that certain kinds of people move through life like they're allowed to collect pieces of you. Your schedule, your habits, your routes, your face. And they don't need to break into your home to do it. They don't need to grab you in an alley. They just need to watch quietly until your life starts adjusting to their presence. I wish I could say I became fearless after all that, like it made me stronger. It didn't. It made me smaller in ways that were hard to notice at first. I started sitting with my back to walls in cafes. I started choosing parking spots under lights. I started wearing headphones without music so I could hear what was happening around me. I started lying about where I lived, where I worked, who I was meeting. And those adjustments became normal, like brushing my teeth. Then something happened that made me realize how easy it is to be erased without anyone ever touching you. It was a weekend trip with friends. We rented a cabin about 2 hours out of town. Nothing remote, really. Just a little place near a lake, surrounded by other cabins, but spaced out enough to feel private. There were 5 of us. We brought groceries and board games. We planned to hike, drink wine, laugh about stupid things. Normal. The first night was fun, loud, safe. The second day, we went hiking on a trail near the lake. It was an easy path, families walking their dogs, kids throwing sticks into the water. Nothing scary. At one point, I fell behind the group because I stopped to tie my shoe. They kept walking, chatting. I knelt down, fingers on my laces, and that's when I noticed something on the ground. A small square of paper tucked under a rock, like someone had hidden it there. I don't know why I picked it up. Curiosity, maybe. Or that part of me that always looks for patterns now. It was A receipt. Crumpled, old. On the back, in pen, were 2 words. Stay quiet. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers cold. I told myself it was a prank, a kid's note, a weird coincidence. I stuffed it into my pocket and hurried to catch up with my friends. I didn't tell them. I didn't want to be the person who turns everything into a threat. I didn't want to drag my paranoia into our weekend. Later that evening, we sat on the cabin porch with drinks. The lake was dark, the surface reflecting nothing. The air smelled like pine and smoke from someone else's fire. We were laughing about something when my friend Jenna said, "Did anyone else see that guy earlier?" We all looked at her. She nodded toward the trees. There was a guy standing near the trailhead when we came back, just watching us. My other friend shrugged. Probably just another hiker. Jenna frowned. No, I mean, he wasn't dressed like a hiker. He was just standing there. I felt my chest tighten. I took a sip of my drink and tried to act casual. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Jenna nodded slowly, but she didn't look convinced. That night, we locked the cabin doors. We pulled the curtains. We went to bed. Sometime in the night, I woke up needing water. I padded into the kitchen, barefoot on cold wood, and poured a glass from the sink. As I stood there drinking, I noticed something on the counter that hadn't been there before. A small square of paper. My throat tightened. I set the glass down slowly and picked up the paper. It was another receipt. On the back, in the same pen, were 2 different words. Not alone. My skin went prickly. I looked around the cabin like I expected someone to be standing in the corner. But the cabin was empty except for my sleeping friends. I walked to the front door, heart pounding, and checked the lock. It was still locked. I checked the back door, locked. Windows closed. I stood there in the dark kitchen, holding that paper, trying to make sense of it. The only way it could be there was if someone had been inside, or if it had been there earlier and I hadn't noticed. But I knew the counter. We'd been cooking there, setting snacks there. There was no way I would have missed a piece of paper sitting in plain sight. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. In the morning, I told my friends. I showed them the paper. They laughed at first, because that's what you do when something is too unsettling. You make it a joke. Maybe it's the cabin owner leaving weird notes, someone said. We checked the rental listing. No mention of that. We looked around the cabin. No signs of anyone else. Still, the mood shifted. We decided to leave a day early. We packed up, cleaned, loaded the car. Everyone moved a little faster than usual, like we all silently agreed not to admit we were scared. Before we left, I went into the bathroom to grab my toiletries. I leaned close to the mirror to brush mascara off my cheek, and that's when I noticed something etched into the corner of the mirror. So faint you could only see it if the light hit it right. A series of tiny scratches, like someone had written with a needle. It took me a second to read it. You don't remember. My stomach dropped. I stared at my own reflection, trying to connect those words to anything inside me. Because the truth was, there had been moments that weekend where I had felt blank, like I was missing pieces, like time jumped slightly. Small gaps. At one point, I remembered being on the porch, laughing, and then suddenly being inside, sitting on the couch, with no memory of walking in. I'd blamed it on drinking, on distraction, on being tired. Now, seeing those words, I wondered if those gaps were real. If someone had been in and out of our space while we slept. If the notes were meant for me specifically, we left. The drive home felt too long. The sun was bright, normal. Cars passed us. People existed like nothing was wrong. But the whole time, I kept thinking about that message. You don't remember. Because what does it mean to not remember something you never knew happened? For weeks after, I tried to let it go. I told myself it was a prank by some previous renter, that the mirror scratches were old, that the notes were coincidence. But I couldn't shake the sense that something had occurred in that cabin that none of us fully saw. Sometimes I think that's the worst kind of fear. Not the fear of what happened, but the fear of what could have happened while you were laughing, distracted, alive. The fear that your life has blind spots and someone else knows exactly where they are. After that, I started avoiding trips, avoiding unfamiliar places. I stuck to routines, and routine can feel like a cure until it becomes a trap. I got a new apartment in a newer building, bright hallways, clean locks, cameras in the lobby. I felt safer there. I told myself it was a fresh start. No old building keys, no weird silences. I started working from home more. I liked the control of it. I liked knowing who was outside my door. My days became predictable in a way that was almost comforting. Wake up, coffee, laptop, meetings, lunch, more meetings, dinner, bed. And then one afternoon, I got an email from myself. It came into my inbox like any other message. Same name, same email address. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only 3 words. Did you sleep? That's it. At first, I thought it was some weird glitch, a spam thing. I checked the header details, but I didn't know what I was looking at. It looked like it came from my account. I checked my sent folder. There it was. Sent at 3:18 a.m. I hadn't been awake at 3:18 a.m. I would have known. I'm a light sleeper. I felt that old coldness return, crawling up my spine. I changed my password immediately. I logged out of all devices. I enabled 2-factor authentication. I did all the practical things. Then I tried to laugh it off. Someone hacked me, I told myself. They sent a creepy message. That's it. But the message wasn't asking for money. It wasn't a scam link. It wasn't trying to get me to click anything. It was personal. Did you sleep? That night, I slept with my phone on the pillow beside me. Volume on. Camera app ready. Like a child clutching a nightlight. At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with another email notification. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, lighting up in the darkness. New email. From me. Blank subject. The body read, "Don't turn on the lights." My hands went numb. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't even blink for what felt like minutes. I lay there listening. The apartment too quiet. My building was newer, insulated, less noisy. The silence here was smooth and thick, like a blanket. I listened for footsteps, for a door, for a breath. Nothing. I wanted to call someone. But who do you call at 2:47 a.m. to say you got an email from yourself telling you not to turn on the lights? I stared at the ceiling until the sky outside started to lighten. In the morning, I checked my account activity. No sign of logins from weird locations. No sign of compromise. I contacted my email provider, went through support, did everything. They said the login looked normal, like it came from my device. I felt a slow, sick realization settle in. If it came from my device at 3 a.m. and I didn't remember sending it, then either someone had access to my phone while I slept, or I had done it. and didn't remember. I started tracking myself obsessively. I set a camera in my bedroom facing the bed. I set a motion sensor app. I put my laptop in a drawer at night and closed it. The first few nights, nothing happened. Then, on the fifth night, the bedroom camera recorded something. I watched it the next morning, stomach tight, finger hovering over the timeline. There I was, asleep, motionless. The room dimly lit by the streetlight through the blinds. At 3:14 a.m., my body shifted. I sat up, not groggy, not slow. I sat up like someone waking for a planned appointment. I swung my legs over the bed and stood. I walked out of the bedroom. The camera couldn't see beyond the doorway. For 4 minutes, the bed remained empty. At 3:18 a.m., I walked back in, got into bed, and lay down. Then I was still again. Watching that footage made my skin crawl, not because of how scary it looked, but because of how ordinary it was. No thrashing, no panic, just purposeful movement, like a routine. I checked my phone's activity log. At 3:18 a.m., the email had been sent. I watched the footage again and again. I didn't remember any of it. That's when I started thinking about those little gaps I'd had before. The missing minutes, the feeling of time jumping, the dream in the old apartment with the keychain sound. What if it wasn't stress? What if it was something my body did without me? I made an appointment with a doctor. I told them I thought I was sleepwalking. They asked questions. Had I been stressed? Had I been drinking? Any new medications? Any history? I said no to most of it. I said I was tired. I said I'd been through some anxiety. They suggested it could be parasomnia, sleep-related behavior. They told me to improve my sleep hygiene, reduce screen time, avoid caffeine, lock doors, keep sharp objects away, lock doors. As if I could lock a door inside my own brain. The emails continued, but not every night. Random, unpredictable. Sometimes they were just one sentence. Your neighbor isn't asleep. Stop leaving the blinds open. Someone knocked. You didn't hear it. Sometimes they were worse. One night, the email said, I watched you watch the footage. My throat tightened so hard I almost gagged. Because if it was truly me sending these emails in my sleep, why would I say that? Unless I was lying to myself, and someone else was inside my life. I checked the bedroom camera footage from that night. At 2:59 a.m., I sat up and stared directly into the camera lens. I stared for almost 30 seconds without blinking. Then I stood and walked out. When I returned, I didn't just go back to bed. I stepped closer to the camera, leaned in, and adjusted it slightly downward, as if making sure it captured my face. Then I went back to bed. In the morning, I found the camera angle changed. I had watched that footage, terrified, and then I had gone through my day pretending it was fine, all while the thing that moved me in the night had adjusted my own surveillance. That day I didn't feel like I owned my body. I felt like I was sharing space with someone who knew my habits better than I did. I unplugged the camera, but unplugging it didn't feel like relief. It felt like giving up the only witness I had. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I bought one of those portable door locks you can use in hotels. I wedged it in. It made me feel a little better, until one morning I woke up with the lock removed and sitting neatly on my nightstand, placed there carefully like someone was telling me, I can do this whenever I want. I didn't remember removing it. I didn't remember anything. That was when I stopped trying to solve it alone. I stayed with my sister for a while. I told her I was having sleep issues. I didn't tell her the emails. I didn't tell her about the footage because I didn't want to see the pity in her eyes, or worse, the disbelief. At her house, I slept in the guest room. She had a dog that slept outside the door. The dog was a comfort. Dogs react to things. Dogs don't lie. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of the dog growling. Not barking, growling low, steady. I lay there in the dark, heart racing, listening. The dog's growl didn't change. It didn't escalate. It stayed controlled. I whispered his name. He didn't respond. Then I heard a soft sound in the hallway. Not footsteps exactly, more like fabric brushing against the wall. Someone moving slowly. The guest room door was closed. I held my breath. The sound stopped. The dog stopped growling instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Then silence. In the morning, my sister said the dog had been restless. She joked about ghosts. I laughed with her, and my laugh sounded hollow, because I realized something then. Even if it was just sleepwalking, even if it was just my brain doing weird things at night, it could still be dangerous. Not because of monsters, because of how vulnerable you are when you can't trust your own awareness. And because if there was someone else involved, someone exploiting that vulnerability, the line between internal and external threat didn't matter anymore. The result was the same. You could be awake and still not know what was happening. You could be asleep and still be moving. You could be safe and still be watched. The last thing I'll tell you tonight is the most ordinary one, which is why it stays with me the most. It wasn't a stranger with a key. It wasn't a man in a parking lot. It wasn't a note in the woods or an email from my own account. It was my mom's house, the place I grew up. I visited her one weekend because she'd been feeling lonely. My dad was gone. The house was too quiet for her. She liked having someone there, even if we barely talked. Her house was exactly the same as it always had been. Same creaky staircase. Same faded family photos. Same smell of laundry detergent and old wood. I slept in my childhood room. The bed was smaller than I remembered. The ceiling seemed lower. That night, I woke up around 1 a.m., needing the bathroom. I stepped into the hall, the floorboards cold under my feet. The hallway was dark, except for the nightlight in the outlet near the stairs. A soft amber glow. I walked toward the bathroom, and that's when I noticed something. The door to my parents' old bedroom was slightly open. It was always closed. My mom kept it closed out of habit, like shutting a chapter. But it was open by a few inches. I paused. I don't know why. Just that feeling again, that small wrongness. I listened. I could hear my mom's breathing from her room down the hall. Soft, regular. From the open door of the old bedroom, I heard nothing. No breathing, no movement. I told myself it was just open because of airflow, because of a draft. I went to the bathroom and came back out. The door was open wider. Not a lot, but enough that the darkness inside looked deeper. I stood there staring at it. It felt ridiculous to be afraid of my own childhood hallway. But fear doesn't care about context. Fear cares about patterns. I stepped closer, slowly. The nightlight cast a thin strip of light across the carpet into the room. I could see the edge of the bed inside, covered with the same old quilt my parents used for years. I could see the dresser, and I could see, in the mirror above the dresser, A reflection, not of me, of the hallway behind me, a shape standing at the top of the stairs. My body went cold, so fast it felt like I'd been dropped into water. I didn't move. I didn't turn. I stared at that mirror, at the reflection, trying to make my brain accept what it was seeing. The shape wasn't dramatic. It wasn't looming. It looked like a person standing still in the dark, just waiting. I forced myself to turn around slowly. The hallway behind me was empty. The top of the stairs was empty. No one. My skin crawled. I turned back to the mirror. The shape was still there. In the mirror, it hadn't moved. It stood in the same place, perfectly still, like it was pinned to that reflection. I stepped backward, away from the door. My breath shallow. The shape in the mirror did not step backward. It remained at the top of the stairs, watching. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body felt locked. I did the only thing I could think of. I closed the bedroom door. I pushed it shut, gently, like loudness would make it real. The moment the door latched, the nightlight seemed brighter. The hallway felt normal again. In that fragile way normal can snap into place. I went back to my room and shut the door behind me. I locked it, even though locks in childhood rooms are mostly symbolic. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I told my mom the door had been open. I asked if she'd gone in there. She frowned. No. I asked if she'd noticed anything weird at night. She hesitated, stirring her coffee slowly. Then she said, almost casually, "Sometimes I hear someone on the stairs." My stomach dropped. What? She shrugged, like she didn't want to make it bigger. At night, just the creak, like a foot on the step. I figured it was the house. I asked her why she didn't tell me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't want you to worry." I stared at her and realized something that made me feel sick. Maybe she had been living with that quiet wrongness for a long time. Maybe she had built her life around it without naming it. Maybe that's what people do. They hear the stair creak at night and tell themselves it's the house settling. They find a door open and tell themselves it's a draft. They wake up tired and tell themselves it's stress. They adjust. They adapt. They become smaller. They keep living. That weekend, I checked the house carefully. I checked the windows, the locks, the basement door, the attic access, everything. I found nothing. I left on Sunday afternoon, hugged my mom, promised to visit again soon. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a notification, an email from me, blank subject. The body read, "Don't go back." I stared at the road ahead, hands tight on the wheel, and I realized how quiet the world can be when it's holding its breath. Because maybe the worst part isn't believing in something impossible. Maybe the worst part is realizing how many explanations you can invent for a feeling and how none of them change the feeling itself. That slow, intimate sense that something is slightly wrong. That the lock turned, even though you changed it. That the note appeared, even though you didn't invite it. That the door opened wider, even though no one touched it. And that somewhere in a familiar place that used to mean safety, there's a presence, human, ordinary, patient, that doesn't need you to see it clearly to make your body remember what fear feels like. It began with my shoes. I had a habit that was almost silly. I'd take my shoes off at the door and line them up neatly against the wall, toes facing out. It wasn't even about being organized. It was just a small ritual that made the place feel like mine. One night, I came home late, tired, half asleep on my feet. I did my little ritual. Left shoe Right shoe, toes out. The next morning, one shoe was turned the other way. Just one, like somebody had nudged it absent-mindedly. I stood there with my coffee and stared at it too long. The way you stare at a word you've typed wrong, and you don't understand how your fingers did it. I told myself I must have done it. Maybe my heel caught it. Maybe I kicked it while I was half asleep. But the feeling didn't go away. That low, nagging feeling that something had happened while I wasn't fully there. I tested it, without admitting to myself that I was testing anything. That night, I lined them up again, even more carefully. I even took a picture on my phone, like a joke. Like, look at me documenting my shoes. The next morning, they were fine, so I relaxed. I forgot about it. Then it happened with the cabinet door under my sink. It had always been a little sticky. You had to lift it slightly as you closed it, or it would catch and stay ajar. I knew this because I lived there. My hand knew it. My shoulder knew the little lift. One afternoon I came home, and it was wide open. Not cracked, not slightly ajar, open like someone had been rummaging around in there and walked away mid-thought. I stood in the kitchen, keys still in my hand, and waited for my brain to supply the normal explanation. Wind, faulty latch. I'd left it open. But I could see the cleaning supplies in there. They weren't arranged the way I kept them. My dish soap was on the left side because I'm right-handed, and it was convenient. Now, it was on the right. That's the detail that made my stomach tilt. Not the open door. The swapped sides. I closed it. I reopened it. I stared. Then I pulled everything out and put it back where I wanted it, almost angrily, like I was correcting a rude stranger. And I told myself maybe I'd been rushing that morning. Maybe I'd done it without noticing. That night I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up and listening. The building was old, and it made noises. Pipes, radiators, footsteps in the hall. Neighbors who worked odd shifts. If you listened hard enough, you could always convince yourself there was a reason for any sound. But the longer I lay there, the more I realized what bothered me wasn't noise. It was the pauses between noises. The next week, I started checking things without meaning to. When I left for work, I'd stop at the door and look back at my living room. I'd note where my throw blanket was draped, which corner of the couch cushion was folded under, the angle of the blinds. Little mental snapshots, just in case. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? My friends would laugh. My mom would worry. And I didn't even have a real story yet. I had a turned shoe and a cabinet door. Then I came home on a Thursday and my bathroom light was on. I know it sounds small, but I never left that light on. The bulb flickered sometimes, and it annoyed me, so I was strict about turning it off. I stood in the hallway and watched the light spilling out from under the bathroom door. And I did something I still feel embarrassed about. I called out. Hello? My voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong in the space. No answer. I pushed the bathroom door open slowly, as if I expected the light itself to be dangerous. The room was empty, toilet lid down, shower curtain still, sink dry. But the light was on. I turned it off and just stood there, listening to the sudden quiet. That night I started leaving little indicators around. Not obvious ones. Things only I would know. I'd pull one drawer out by half an inch. I'd set my dish towel on the oven handle in a very particular fold. I'd align the remote control to the edge of the coffee table. It sounds obsessive when I say it out loud, but it didn't feel like obsession at first. It felt like data collection. like I was trying to be fair to reality. If nothing changed, I was wrong. If something changed, I wasn't crazy. The next day, the drawer was closed. I stared at it for so long my eyes went unfocused. I hadn't closed it. I knew I hadn't. I'd been deliberate. I'd done it slowly, like a person placing a trap. I opened it again and shoved it closed, and then opened it again, like I could reverse time if I did it enough times. I checked the windows. Locked. I checked the door. Locked. And then, this was the moment my rational mind offered a lifeline. I wondered if maintenance had been in. Sometimes they came in if there was a leak or an inspection. I'd gotten notices before. Maybe I missed one. Maybe I didn't read the email. I checked my email. Nothing. I checked the building's bulletin board by the mailboxes. Nothing. I checked with my neighbor, a woman who always smelled faintly like laundry detergent and spoke softly, like she didn't want to disturb the air. Did maintenance come by this week? I asked casually, like it didn't matter. She shook her head. Not that I saw. Why? No reason, I said, and forced a smile that felt like my face was lying. That night, I put a tiny piece of clear tape across the top of my front door, from the door to the frame. It was nearly invisible. If the door opened, the tape would break. Simple. Clean. I did it, and felt stupid and relieved at the same time. In the morning, the tape was unbroken. I laughed out loud, quietly, like I didn't want to wake anyone. I told myself I was spiraling. I told myself I'd been stressed. Work had been bad. I hadn't taken a real day off in months. I was inventing meaning. Then I went into the kitchen and found my dish towel unfolded, not on the oven handle, on the counter, spread flat as if it had been used to wipe something. I stood there, staring at it, and my brain did this strange thing where it tried to hold two thoughts at once. The tape was unbroken, and something in my apartment had still been touched. I walked back to the front door and stared at the tape again, like if I stared hard enough it would confess. Unbroken. I checked the windows again. Locked. I checked the balcony door. Locked. Then I checked the hall closet where the building had access to a utility panel. Inside the closet, behind my coats, there was a little square hatch I'd never paid attention to. I pulled the coats aside and found it slightly crooked, like it had been removed and put back in a hurry. My throat went dry. I knelt down and pressed my fingers to the edge. The paint was chipped there, fresh and clean beneath, as if it had been disturbed recently. I stared at that little hatch for a long time. It was the kind of thing you only notice if you're already afraid. I didn't open it right away. I told myself I shouldn't, like opening it would create a new reality. But eventually I did. I pried it gently. It opened into darkness and stale air, like a breath from inside the building. And then, slowly, my eyes adjusted, and I saw that it wasn't just a panel. It was an access point, a narrow space between walls, like a crawl space. I shined my phone flashlight in there. The beam picked up dust, a few cobwebs, some old wiring, and then something that made my skin tighten, a footprint in the dust, not mine, too narrow, the heel too small, like someone had stepped there carefully, trying not to leave evidence, but dust always tells the truth if you shine light at the right angle. My mouth opened, and nothing came out. I backed up so fast my knees scraped the closet floor. I closed the hatch and shoved my coats back in front of it like I could hide it from myself. Then I did what people always say you should do. and what you never think you'll actually need to do. I called the police. I tried to keep my voice steady. I explained that I thought someone had been in my apartment, that there might be access through a utility crawl space. The dispatcher was calm in a way that made me feel both safe and foolish. When the officers arrived, they were polite, but I could see it in their faces. They were trying not to look like they thought I was being dramatic. They checked my apartment. They checked the windows, the locks, the door. They checked the closet and opened the hatch. They shined a bigger flashlight. One officer climbed up a little and leaned into the space. He made a sound under his breath. Not a word, just a shift in breathing. Like something in there had a smell he didn't like. He backed out and dusted his hands. "This is an access run," he said. "Some buildings have these. Maintenance uses them. Someone's been using it," I said. I heard the sharpness in my own voice and hated it. He nodded slowly. "Maybe. Hard to say." I showed them the footprint. I showed them the moved towel. I showed them the cabinet. It all sounded small when I said it out loud, like I was describing a ghost story where the ghost was a disorganized roommate. They took a report anyway. They told me to talk to management. They told me to get a camera if I could. They told me to call again if anything else happened. After they left, the apartment felt exposed, like the walls had thinned. I went to the building manager the next day, a man with tired eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. I told him about the hatch. I told him I needed it sealed. He sighed, like I was asking for a luxury. "Those runs are part of the building," he said. "We can't seal them." "So anyone can crawl through them?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not anyone. Maintenance. Can you at least lock the panel from my side?" He looked at me like he was deciding what kind of tenant I was. "I'll put in a work order," he said. Days passed. Nothing changed. No lock. No visit. No notice. I bought a cheap camera and pointed it toward my front door. It connected to my phone. It was the kind of thing people buy to watch their pets. The first night, I barely slept. I checked the app constantly. I watched the same empty hallway frame like it might blink first. At around 3:12 a.m., the camera recorded motion. My heart punched so hard it felt like my body was trying to wake itself fully up. I opened the clip. At first, it was nothing. A shift in light. Maybe a neighbor passing. Then, I saw the doorknob move. Slowly. Not rattling. Not testing, like someone unsure. Turning like someone who knew exactly how much pressure to apply. But the door didn't open, because it was locked. The doorknob turned back, paused. Then the motion alert ended. I watched the clip again and again. I zoomed in. I turned the brightness up, and then I noticed something worse. A shadow very close to the door. The shape of a person leaning in, listening, not trying to break in, just listening. The next day, I got a second camera and placed it in the closet, aimed at the hatch. I had to tape it up behind my coats. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat on my couch with the lights low, pretending I was calm, pretending I was in control. At 2:47 a.m., the closet camera sent an alert. I opened the feed. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely tap the screen. The hatch was in frame. My coats hung like sleeping bodies. Nothing moved for a full 10 seconds. Then, the hatch shifted, not enough to open, just enough to show that pressure was being applied from the other side. Like someone had pressed their palm against it and felt the resistance. It shifted again, slightly more. I held my breath without meaning to, like my lungs understood that sound was dangerous. Then, very slowly, the hatch eased open by maybe half an inch. My phone, camera, microphone picked up a faint noise, fabric rubbing on wood. And then, in the darkness beyond that crack, something pale appeared. Not a face, a hand. 2 fingers curled around the edge, feeling the inside of my closet like it was searching for a latch. I stood up so fast my knees hit the coffee table, and I didn't even feel it. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I just moved quietly toward my front door, because the truth hit me in a cold, clean line. If someone was coming through the wall, I didn't want to be trapped in a box with them. I grabbed my keys and my phone and slipped out. In the hallway, I pressed my back to the wall and listened. I could hear my own breathing. And behind my apartment door, I could hear something else, a soft, careful movement, like someone trying to be silent and failing only in the smallest ways. I walked down the stairs without using the elevator. I went out into the street. The night air hit me like a slap, and the normal world looked wrong, like it had too many angles. I called the police again. I told them I had it on camera. I told them someone was inside my walls. They came faster this time. I stood outside with my arms crossed tight around myself while they went in. A neighbor opened their door a crack and watched. I couldn't look at them. A few minutes later, an officer came back out and asked me to come inside. I didn't want to. Every step felt like walking into a room where something had happened to me without permission. In my closet, the hatch was open. Wide open. My coats were pushed aside. The officer pointed his flashlight into the crawl space. They'd found a sleeping bag, a plastic bottle half full of water, a handful of wrappers, and a notebook. The officer held the notebook carefully, like it was evidence in a movie. The cover was cheap. The pages inside were filled with handwriting. Not random, not scribbles, observations. My schedule, written in neat lines. The times I left. The times I came back. Notes about what I wore. Notes about when I turned off the lights. And then, in a different ink, a different pressure, one line that made my blood turn slow. Sometimes she stands very still in the kitchen, like she knows. I moved out that week. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't fold things. I shoved my life into boxes and garbage bags, like if I did it fast enough I could outrun whatever version of myself had been watched. Management tried to act shocked. The police told me they were investigating. They told me it was hard to identify someone who could move through those access runs. I stayed with a friend for a month. I slept with the lights on. I jumped at the sound of my friend walking to the bathroom at night. And even after I moved into a new place, new building, new locks, I still did it. I still line my shoes up, toes out, because part of me is still waiting to see if one of them turns the other way. And the worst part is, I don't always know if it was someone else, or if I've just trained myself to need proof that I'm alone. A year after that, I started dating someone named Aaron. He was normal, in a way that felt like a gift. Steady job, calm voice. The kind of person who always remembered to charge his phone. He lived in a small townhouse in a quiet neighborhood where the streetlights worked and the sidewalks were clean. His place had a feeling of being lived in carefully, not sterile, just managed. The first time I stayed over, I noticed his locks. There were 3. A deadbolt, a chain, and a second latch up high. Bad neighborhood? I asked, trying to sound light. He smiled. No, just habit. I didn't push. I understood habits. A month in, I started keeping some things there. A toothbrush, a sweater, a pair of socks in his dresser. That's when I noticed the first thing that was slightly wrong. I'd left my toothbrush on the left side of his sink. He kept his on the right. We'd done it naturally, like drawing a line between two people. The next morning, mine was on the right, not knocked over, not moved an inch, swapped places, like someone had made a point. I picked it up and stared at it. Aaron was in the kitchen making coffee. "Did you move my toothbrush?" I asked. He looked genuinely confused. "No." "Why?" I held it up. "It was on the other side." He shrugged. "Maybe you put it there." "I didn't," I said, and heard the firmness in my own voice. I hated how quickly the old fear snapped into place, like a magnet finding metal. He came into the bathroom, still holding his mug, and looked at the sink like it was a boring puzzle. "Could have been you," he said gently. "You were tired." I wanted to let it go. I wanted to laugh at myself, but the skin on my arms wouldn't relax. That night after Aaron fell asleep, I lay awake and listened. His breathing was slow. The house creaked, like all houses do. A car passed outside, and then I heard something I didn't recognize. A faint tap, not from the window, not from the pipes, from inside the wall. One tap, pause, two taps, pause, like someone testing a code they didn't remember. I sat up. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of Aaron's phone charger light. I held my breath. Silence. I lay back down and told myself it was the house settling. Townhouses were attached. You could hear neighbors. You could hear anything if you were primed to hear it. The next week, I stopped hearing taps, and I let my body unclench again. Then I started noticing Aaron doing something strange. He'd pause at certain doors before opening them. Not long, just a beat, like he was listening for something on the other side. One night I caught him standing at the basement door, hand on the knob, head tilted slightly. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He startled, just a little. "Nothing," he said. "Just thought I heard something." "In the basement?" He nodded. "Probably the furnace." I'd never even seen his basement. He kept that door closed all the time. "Can I see down there?" I asked, half joking. His smile was quick and thin. "It's a mess. That should have been nothing. People have messy basements." But that night, when he went upstairs to brush his teeth, I walked to the basement door. I didn't open it at first. I just stood there. The knob was cold. I put my ear near the door, feeling ridiculous, like a kid in a haunted house, and I heard it. Not the furnace, not water. Breathing, very quiet, very controlled, like someone holding it back as much as they could. I stepped away so fast my heel hit the wall. Aaron came down the stairs a moment later, and I forced myself to stand normally in the living room, staring at the TV like I was watching it. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded too high. "Just tired." We went to bed. He fell asleep, quickly. I didn't. In the dark, I watched the outline of the basement door down the hall, visible faintly from the bedroom. I watched it like it might open on its own. Around 4 a.m., Aaron got up. I heard his footsteps, soft. I heard the bedroom door open and close. I waited, muscles tight. Then I heard him at the basement door. The chain rattle of the latch, the slow turn of the knob. A pause. Then the door opened, and he went down. I lay there in bed with my mouth dry, thinking. He's checking the furnace. He's checking something. He's just a man in his own house, doing normal things. But the pause before he went down, that pause felt like fear. I slid out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was cold in the way it gets when you're awake at night and your body hasn't decided to be warm. The basement stairs were dark. I could see a thin strip of light from below. He'd turned something on. I went down 3 steps and stopped. My hand gripped the railing so tight it hurt. From below, I heard Aaron speaking, not loudly, not angrily, softly, like he didn't want to wake someone. "It's okay," he said. "It's okay. Just stay there." I froze. There was a pause. And then I heard another voice. Not clear words, just a sound, like someone humming or murmuring through a closed mouth. Like they were answering without language. Aaron's voice again, calm. "I'll bring it." I said, "I'll bring it." Bring what? I backed up slowly, step by step, until I was back upstairs. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was tapping the walls from inside. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at my own faint reflection in the mirror. Part of me wanted to call the police. Part of me knew how that sounded. My boyfriend is talking to someone in his basement at 4 a.m. I sat there until I heard Aaron's footsteps upstairs again. He moved quietly. I heard the basement door close. Then he came to the bathroom door and knocked softly. "Hey," he said. "You all right? You've been in there a while." I swallowed. "Yeah," I said, forcing steadiness. "I couldn't sleep." He sounded relieved. "Come back to bed." When I opened the bathroom door, he was standing there in sweatpants, hair messy, looking normal. Too normal. I climbed back into bed. He put an arm around me like nothing had happened. I waited until his breathing slowed again. Then I gently moved his arm and got up. I did it with a weird calm, like my body had decided panic wasn't useful anymore. I walked to the basement door and put my hand on the knob. It was warm, freshly touched. I opened it. The stairs were darker now. No light from below. I took a step down, then another. I used my phone flashlight, aiming it down like a weapon. The beam hit concrete walls, boxes, shelves. Halfway down, I smelled something. Not rot, not garbage, something sweet and stale, like cereal left too long in milk. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw a second door. I hadn't known there was another door. It was a heavy door with a keypad lock on it. Not the kind of lock you put on a storage room. The kind you put on something you don't want opened. I stood there staring at it, feeling my skin tighten. Then my flashlight beam moved slightly, and I saw a plastic bowl on the floor near the door, like a pet's food bowl, empty. Next to it, a folded blanket. My breath went shallow. I heard something shift behind the door. Not a loud sound, just a careful movement, like someone changing position slowly. I backed up, every nerve screaming at me not to turn my back. I went upstairs. I put my shoes on with shaking hands. I grabbed my coat and my bag. Aaron woke up when the bedroom light flicked on. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "I need to go home," I said. He sat up, confused. "It's 4 in the morning." "I know," I said. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on my hands, because if I looked at his face, I might start believing him. He rubbed his eyes. Did something happen? I paused at the door. I could have asked. I could have confronted him. I could have demanded to know who was behind that locked door. why there was a bowl, why he spoke softly at night, but I thought about the way my apartment had taught me something. Fear doesn't always come with a clear answer. Sometimes it comes with details that don't fit, and the moment you try to force them to fit, you put yourself in the wrong place. So I said, I just can't sleep here. Aaron's voice turned softer, almost hurt. Did I do something? I forced myself to meet his eyes for a second. His expression was sincere. His face looked like a person who'd been woken up and didn't know why the world was suddenly different. But sincerity isn't proof of safety. I learned that the hard way. I'm sorry, I said. I have to go. I left. He texted me all day. Concerned, confused. Talk to me. Are you okay? What's going on? I didn't answer. That night, I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe he had a roommate down there. Maybe he had a sick relative he was caring for. Maybe it was something private, something sad. Maybe the bowl was for a cat. Maybe the humming was a heater. So, like an idiot, I went back, not inside, just to the street. I parked down the block and looked at his townhouse like it was a stage set. The curtains were drawn. The house looked still. At 2:58 a.m., a light turned on in the basement window. I held my breath. A shadow moved behind that basement window. Not Aaron's. Too small, too low to the ground. It moved in a strange way, like someone crouched, shifting their weight from hand to hand, as much as from foot to foot. Then a second shadow appeared. Aaron. He leaned down, like he was speaking to someone at floor level. I couldn't hear anything from the street, but I could see his posture. Gentle, familiar. The small shadow shifted again, and for 1 second, the basement light hit something pale in the window. A face, close to the glass. Not distorted, not monster-like. Just wrong in the way real humans can be wrong when they've been kept somewhere too long. The skin looked too light, like it hadn't seen sun. The eyes looked unfocused, not used to looking out. And then the face moved away. The basement light went off. I sat there in my car, hands locked on the steering wheel, and tried to swallow the taste of metal in my mouth. I never spoke to Aaron again. I blocked his number. I didn't tell my friends the real reason. I said it just didn't work out. Sometimes I imagine him at his kitchen sink, moving a toothbrush from one side to the other without thinking. Sometimes I imagine the person in that basement, hearing the small sounds of his life and learning them the way you learn the rhythms of a home even when it isn't yours. And sometimes, late at night, I remember the sound through that basement door. Not screaming, not begging, just a soft, closed mouth humming, like someone trying to soothe themselves to sleep. I started working a new job after I moved. It was the kind of office job where the building is all glass and bright hallways, and the bathrooms smell like citrus cleaner, no matter what time of day it is. It should have felt safe. But there was something about that building that made me uneasy. And at first I couldn't name it. Everything was too clean, too neutral. Like a place designed to leave no imprint. There was a security desk in the lobby, and every employee had a badge. You needed it for the elevator, for certain doors, even for the stairwells after hours. I liked that. I liked systems. Systems made me feel like someone had thought about danger. The first week, I started noticing a man. Not in a romantic way. Not even in a suspicious way at first. More like a repeating background detail. He was always in the lobby at around the time I arrived. Not at the desk, not talking, just sitting in one of the chairs near the window with a coffee, staring out at the street. He looked like he could have worked there, but his clothes were always slightly off. Too casual for our office, too neat for someone who wasn't trying. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone. A spouse, a friend, a job interview. Then I realized he was there every morning. Same chair, same posture, same slow sip of coffee. After a while, it became normal. He became part of my routine, like the flicker of a fluorescent light you stop seeing. Then one morning, as I swiped my badge and walked toward the elevators, I felt his eyes. Not a glance, not a casual look, a steady attention, like he was reading something off my face. I turned my head slightly and caught him staring. He didn't look away. He smiled, just a little. I gave a polite half-smile back, the way you do when you don't want trouble. Then I kept walking. On the elevator up, I told myself not to be dramatic. Maybe he recognized me from somewhere. Maybe he was lonely. People in cities do strange little routines because they need structure. But that afternoon, I found a sticky note on my desk. It was yellow, plain. No signature. It said, "You look tired today. Get some rest." My desk was in an open-plan office. People left notes for each other all the time. But this one wasn't from anyone I knew. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost printed. I asked my team casually if anyone left it. They all shook their heads. One person joked that I had an office admirer. I laughed along. My laugh sounded normal, but inside, something tightened. Because I remembered my old apartment. I remembered the notes in that notebook. Observations, small, specific, the kind of details that aren't threatening on their own, but become threatening when you realize someone is collecting them. I threw the sticky note away. I washed my hands in the bathroom like the paper had left something on me. The next morning, the man was there again in the lobby chair. Same coffee, same window. This time I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the elevator. But I could feel him watching. The day after that, another note appeared on my desk. "Your hair looks nice when you wear it down." I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was protecting him. Because I could already hear the responses. "He's just being nice. Tell HR. It's probably one of the guys here messing with you." It's hard to explain how it feels. When something is wrong in a quiet way, it feels like you're trying to convince people a room is cold when everyone else is comfortable. That week, I started paying attention to the security desk. There were always guards down there, different ones depending on the shift. I began timing my arrival, coming earlier or later, just to see if the man adjusted. He did. If I came at 8:12 instead of 8:30, he was there. If I came at 9:05, he was there. Like he wasn't arriving at a time. He was arriving for me. I tried leaving through a different entrance, at lunch. When I came back, he was sitting in the lobby chair again, coffee in hand, like he'd never moved. I looked at the security guard, hoping for some sign they knew him. But the guard didn't seem to register him as unusual. Either they recognized him and didn't care, or they truly didn't see what I was seeing. Then the notes started appearing in places that weren't my desk. One was in my coat pocket, folded neatly. "You forgot to zip your bag." Another was tucked under my keyboard at home. "You should close your curtains. People can see in." That one made my legs go weak, because that meant someone had been in my apartment, or, worse, that they'd been close enough to see through my windows and knew my habits inside my home. I lived on the 3rd floor, not ground level, not easy to peek into. I checked my windows, locked. I checked my door, locked. I sat on my couch with all the lights on and tried to make my brain behave. Maybe it was someone from work who knew where I lived. Maybe a friend of a friend. Maybe someone I'd met once. Maybe Aaron had. No, don't do that. Don't connect everything. But I couldn't stop the thought someone was watching me in more than one place. The next morning I went to the security desk and tried to sound casual. "Hey," I said, pointing gently toward the lobby chairs. "Do you know the guy who sits over there sometimes? With the coffee?" The guard glanced over. His face didn't change. "Which guy?" My stomach dropped. Slow. I turned my head. The chair was empty. "No one?" I asked, trying not to let my voice crack. The guard frowned slightly, as if I was wasting his time. "Ma'am, people come and go. If you have an issue, tell me what it is." "I think someone's leaving notes for me," I said, the words tasting ridiculous. His eyebrows lifted. "Notes?" I nodded. He looked at me the way people look at someone who's about to cry in public. Not cruel, just uncomfortable. "You want to file a report?" he asked. I hesitated. If I filed a report without proof, it would feel like I was admitting something about myself, like I was unstable, like I was imagining things. I'll let you know," I said. Upstairs, I told my manager I needed to leave early. I lied and said I had a dentist appointment. I went home and sat by my window for hours, watching the street, like a cat watches birds. I didn't see anything. Then, at around dusk, I saw a person across the street, standing under a tree, not moving much, just there. My heart started pounding. It was the man from the lobby. I recognized the way he held his shoulders, the stillness of him. He looked up at my building, then slightly to the side, like he was checking which window was mine. I stepped back from the glass, suddenly aware of how visible I might have been. I went to the side of the window and peeked out. He raised one hand, not a wave, not friendly, more like he was acknowledging that he knew I was there. I backed away fully, hands shaking. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I told them there was a man watching my apartment, that he'd been leaving notes, that I was scared. They asked for a description. I gave it. They asked if he'd threatened me. I said no, not directly. They said they'd send someone. While I waited, I stood in my living room with the lights off, listening to my own breathing. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then I heard my buzzer. I didn't answer it. I didn't know if it was the police or him. The buzzer rang again and again. Then it stopped. My phone buzzed with a notification from my building's front door camera app. I'd installed it after the cabinet incident in my old apartment. It pointed at the entryway. I opened the clip. A man stood at the front door, looking up at the camera with a calm expression. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. He didn't try to hide his face. He didn't act in a hurry. He simply lifted the paper toward the camera, as if presenting it. Then he slipped it into the mail slot and walked away. When the police finally arrived, the man was gone. Of course he was. I gave them the note from my mail slot with a trembling hand. It said, "I can tell when you're alone." The officer's face changed at that. Not panic, but seriousness. They took the note. They asked if I had any enemies, any exes, anyone who knew my schedule. I thought of Aaron and felt sick, but I said no. They walked around outside. They checked the street. They found nothing. When they left, they told me to call again if he returned. They told me to consider staying with someone. They told me to keep documentation. That night I stayed with a coworker, a woman I barely knew. because I didn't want to admit to my friends that I was being followed by someone I couldn't even name. She gave me her guest room. She gave me tea. She asked gentle questions. I didn't tell her about the notes under my keyboard. I didn't tell her about the lobby, because even as I spoke, I could feel the story slipping into the kind of thing people don't fully believe unless they've felt it. I slept badly, dreaming of paper folding itself into shapes. The next morning, I went into work with my coworker. We entered together. The lobby was bright, busy, normal, and the man was sitting in his chair by the window, coffee in hand, watching the door. When he saw me, he smiled. My coworker noticed my stiffening and looked where I was looking. "Do you know him?" she asked. I swallowed. My voice came out thin. "No." She stared at him for a second, then back at me. "He's just sitting there," she said. "Yeah," I whispered. "That's the problem." I walked up to the security desk, this time with my coworker beside me, like a witness. "There," I said, pointing. "That man. He's been following me. He's leaving notes." The guard looked where I pointed. Then he looked back at me. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "there is no one sitting there." My coworker turned her head toward the chair again. Her face changed, confusion tightening her mouth. "There was," she started. The chair was empty. No coffee, no man, just the imprint of someone having sat there, if you believed in imprints. My coworker looked at me like she was trying to choose between believing her eyes and believing me. I felt heat creep up my neck. Embarrassment, anger, fear, all tangled together. I pulled out my phone and showed them the video from my apartment door camera. I showed them the man's face. The guard leaned in, squinting. "Okay," he said, cautious now. That's something." I went straight to HR. I filed a formal complaint. I turned over the footage. I gave them every note I'd saved. Because yes, I'd saved them. Even the ones that made me feel dirty to touch. HR took it seriously in that professional, sanitized way that still felt far away from the fear in my body. They offered escorts to my car. They offered to adjust my schedule. They offered to notify building security. But none of it answered the question that kept looping in my mind. How could he be there and not there? How could two different people see different realities at the same time? That afternoon, as I sat at my desk trying to work, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line. Just one sentence. "You should stop asking other people to look." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I didn't go back to that job. I told them I was resigning for personal reasons. I gave notice. I tried to be calm. HR asked if it was related to the notes. I said I didn't know. I moved again. New place, new locks, new routines. The notes stopped, but sometimes, in lobbies, in coffee shops, in the reflective glass of an office building, I catch the sensation that someone is sitting somewhere nearby, still and patient, waiting for me to remember how easy it is to be watched without being seen. And on nights when I can't sleep, I think about that email. Not the threat, the phrasing. "You should stop asking other people to look." Like the looking itself was the thing that irritated him. Like he preferred me alone with my own doubt. My dad used to tell me that the safest place in the world was a hospital. He said it like a fact. Like hospitals were made of rules and bright lights and people trained to notice problems. He believed in systems the way some people believe in prayer. When he got sick, I moved back to my hometown for a while to help. It was a small town with a single hospital, the kind that served everyone, from broken wrists to heart attacks to babies being born. The hospital had that smell that hits you the moment you walk in. Sanitizer and warm air and something faintly metallic. It smelled like hope and anxiety mixed together. My dad's illness wasn't dramatic. It was the slow kind. The kind that turns a person into paperwork. I spent hours there. Days, nights. At first, everything was normal. Nurses came and went. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Machines beeped calmly in the background, like they were keeping time. Then my dad started saying things. Small things. Not accusations. Observations. "There was a man in here last night," he said one morning, eyes half open, voice quiet. "A nurse?" I asked, adjusting his blanket. He shook his head slightly. "Not a nurse." He didn't talk. He just stood by the door. I smiled gently. Maybe it was security. My dad looked at me with tired seriousness. He didn't look at me. He looked at the wall, like he was waiting for something. I told myself it was medication. Hospitals make people dream while they're awake. But then I started noticing a detail. A piece of tape. On the inside of my dad's door frame, there was a small strip of white tape, maybe an inch long, stuck vertically, like someone had marked a spot. It wasn't hospital labeling tape. It looked like ordinary household tape, the kind you use to wrap boxes. I touched it. It peeled slightly, then stuck again. "Did you put this here?" I asked my dad. He frowned faintly. "No," I asked the nurse later, casually. "What's the tape on the door frame for?" She glanced at it and frowned. "That shouldn't be there," she said. "Probably from maintenance. I'll get rid of it." But she didn't. Or she forgot. Or someone put it back. The next day, it was still there. Then there was a second piece, lower down. Then, on the third day, I noticed tape on the frame of the room across the hall, too. I started watching the hallway more closely. At night, the hospital quieted in a way that felt unnatural. Even the beeps seemed softer. The overhead lights dimmed. The staff moved like ghosts, but not in a horror way, just in the way people move when they're trying not to disturb suffering. Around 2 a.m., I stepped out into the hallway to stretch. My dad was asleep. I'd been sitting in the chair so long my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The hall was empty. Then, from far down the corridor, I saw a figure. A man in dark clothes, walking slowly, not carrying anything, not pushing a cart. He wasn't in scrubs. He wasn't wearing a badge that I could see. He stopped at a door. He stood there for a moment, perfectly still. Then he moved to the next door. Same thing. He wasn't checking in like a nurse. He wasn't peeking in like a doctor. He was just marking time, like he was counting rooms. I felt a small tightening in my chest. Not full panic yet, just the beginning of it. I stepped back into my dad's room and watched through the narrow glass window in the door. The man reached my dad's door and stopped. He stood so close to the frame that I could barely see him in the window, just the edge of his shoulder, the dark curve of his head. He didn't open the door. He didn't knock. He stood there long enough that my mouth went dry. Then he lifted his hand and touched the tape on the doorframe. Not ripping it, not adjusting it, just pressing it gently, like he was checking if it was still there. Then he walked on. I waited a full minute before I stepped out again. The hallway was empty. I went straight to the nurse's station, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hi," I said. "I just saw a man walking down the hall touching tape on door frames. He wasn't in scrubs. Do you know who that is?" The nurse on duty looked tired. "Tape," she repeated. "Yes." I said, insisting gently. On the door frames? She blinked slowly, like she was trying to picture what I meant. We don't put tape on door frames. I know, I said. That's why I'm asking. She stood up and walked with me to my dad's room. We looked at the tape together. Her face tightened. That's not ours, she said quietly. She peeled it off, and this time she dropped it in the trash immediately, like it bothered her to touch it. Probably a visitor messing around, she said, but her tone wasn't confident. Can you check the cameras? I asked. She hesitated. We can tell security. She called. Security. A guard came, older, with a slow walk and a careful face. I explained what I saw. He nodded like he'd heard a version of this before. We'll do a sweep, he said. I watched them walk down the corridor. It felt like relief, watching a uniformed person take my fear and turn it into procedure. When the guard came back, he said, "No one unusual. What about the cameras?" I asked again. He gave me a look that was polite but closed. Cameras aren't everywhere, and even if they were, we'd need administration to review. Can you at least make sure he doesn't come back? I said, and immediately hated how helpless it sounded. We'll keep an eye out, he said. If you see him again, call. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by my dad's bed with my phone in my hand, waiting for footsteps. At 3:18 a.m., my dad stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused. He looked past me toward the door, then flinched slightly. He's back, he whispered. I turned, heart hammering. The hallway outside was dim. The glass window in the door showed only shadow. Then a face appeared in that window, not pressed against it, not peering dramatically, just there like he'd been standing perfectly positioned. He looked in. His expression was blank, almost bored. His eyes moved slowly around the room. I froze, a cold wave going down my spine. My body didn't want to believe what it was seeing. He didn't open the door. He didn't try to come in. He just watched. Then he stepped away, and the window went dark again. I ran to the nurse's station. I didn't care how it looked. He was just at my dad's door, I said, breathless. He looked in. Right now, the nurse's face sharpened. She grabbed the phone and called security immediately. This time, 2 guards came. They moved faster. They walked down the hall with purpose. I followed, because I couldn't stop myself. At the end of the corridor, there was a stairwell door that led to a service exit. The guard pushed it open. Cold air rushed in. The stairwell smelled like concrete and damp. No one was there. But on the inside of the stairwell door, someone had placed a strip of tape. White, vertical, exactly like the one from my dad's door. One of the guards stared at it, jaw tightening. He looked at the other guard. "This again," he muttered. That phrase, "this again," hit me harder than any scream could have, because it meant it wasn't new. It was a pattern. They tore the tape off. They checked the stairwell. They checked the exit. Nothing. The next day, I asked to speak to administration. I wanted answers. I wanted to know if this had happened before. I wanted to know who was walking the halls at night like they had ownership of the place. A woman in a blazer met with me. She listened politely. She took notes. She said they took security seriously. She said they would look into it. Her eyes were kind, in the way people's eyes get when they're trying to soothe a complaint. I realized in that moment that I was one more anxious family member in a building full of anxious family members. A person with a story that sounded strange in a place where strange things happen every day. My dad was discharged a few days later. We went home. Life became about medications and quiet dinners and pretending we had control. Then, 2 weeks after he came home, he asked me something in a voice that made my stomach drop. "Did you put tape on my door?" he said. I turned slowly toward him. "What?" He pointed toward the hallway. There, on the inside of our front door frame, was a strip of white tape. Vertical, careful, placed at about shoulder height, exactly like the hospital ones. I walked to it and touched it. The adhesive was fresh. My hand started shaking so hard I had to press my palm against the wood to steady myself. I peeled it off. It left a faint, sticky residue. My dad watched me quietly, eyes tired. "He knows where we live now," my dad whispered. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to tell him it was coincidence, but my mouth wouldn't form the lie. That night, I sat on the couch with all the lights on, staring at the doorframe where the tape had been. I thought about hospitals, about systems, about cameras and guards and procedures, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. A person doesn't need to break rules loudly to do damage. Sometimes all they need is to move through places that already expect people to come and go. Places where no one wants to be the one who stops a stranger and asks, "Who are you and why are you here?" I installed cameras. I changed locks. I stayed awake more than I slept, but the tape never came back, which in a strange way was worse, because it meant whoever had put it there didn't need it anymore. My cousin works as a cleaner, not in a dramatic way, just ordinary cleaning, offices after hours. Sometimes an empty school during summer break, sometimes an apartment after a tenant moves out. It's the kind of job people don't notice until something is wrong. One weekend, she called me and asked if I wanted to make some extra money. She had a big job, an older house, newly purchased, sitting empty for months. The new owner wanted it deep cleaned before moving in. "It's easy," she said. "Just dusty. Big place. I don't want to do it alone." I should have said no. I should have stayed away from empty houses. But money is persuasive, and my cousin was family, and the job sounded normal. So I went. The house was in a quiet neighborhood with old trees and wide lawns. It looked like the kind of place people buy when they want a fresh start. 2 stories, pale siding, a wraparound porch. The key was in a lockbox. My cousin punched in the code and handed me the key with a grin. "See," she said, "normal." The moment we opened the door, the smell hit us. Not rot, not mold, stale air, closed windows, old carpet, like a house that had held its breath for a long time. We walked through, turning on lights, opening blinds. Dust rose in faint clouds. At first it was just cleaning, vacuuming corners, wiping baseboards, pulling dead leaves out of window tracks. Then I noticed something in the living room. In the corner by the fireplace, there was a faint line on the carpet, like something heavy had been there and recently moved. A rectangle shape. "Did you move something?" I asked my cousin. She shook her head. "We just got here." We looked at the corner, together. The carpet pile was pressed down in a neat outline, like a rug or a piece of furniture had been sitting there for years, and then removed. "Maybe the old owners took a couch," she said. "Maybe," I said, but it didn't sit right. It was too deliberate, too centered. We kept cleaning. We worked our way through the house. In the kitchen, I opened a cabinet under the sink and found a plastic container inside. It was empty, but it had scratches on the inside, like something had been scraping at it. My cousin laughed. "Probably a pet bowl," she said. I didn't laugh. I thought about Aaron's basement bowl, and my stomach tightened. Upstairs, in one of the bedrooms, there was a closet with a small attic hatch. When I opened the closet door, a tiny piece of paper fluttered down onto the floor. It was a receipt. Old, crumpled. It was from a grocery store in town, dated 3 days ago. I stared at it. "This house is supposed to be empty," I said. My cousin leaned over and squinted. "That's weird," she admitted. But her tone still held that softness people use when they don't want to scare themselves. "It could have blown in," she offered. "Inside a closet?" I said. She shrugged, uneasy now. "Maybe someone came in." We checked the windows. Locked. We checked the doors. Locked. The attic hatch looked dusty, as if it hadn't been opened in a long time. But then I saw something on the closet floor. Tiny bits of insulation. Fresh, pale yellow. Like someone had disturbed it. My cousin went quiet. "Let's just finish," she said, too quickly. We kept cleaning, but the mood changed. The house felt less like a job and more like a place we were intruding. Around mid-afternoon, I went downstairs to refill my water bottle. My cousin stayed upstairs. As I walked through the hallway, I heard a sound from the laundry room. A soft thump. I froze. It sounded like someone setting something down gently. I told myself it was the house settling, the pipes, the dryer vent rattling. But the laundry room door was slightly open, and I could see darkness inside. I walked closer. The smell changed near the doorway. Not just stale house smell, warm breath smell, like a room that had been occupied recently. I pushed the door open slowly. The laundry room was small, washer and dryer, shelves with old detergent bottles, a utility sink. Nothing moved, but on the floor, tucked behind the washer, I saw something that didn't belong. A sleeping pad, thin, cheap foam, rolled halfway, like someone had been interrupted and didn't have time to hide it properly. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I backed out and called up the stairs, trying to keep my voice normal. "Hey," I called. "Can you come down for a second?" My cousin's footsteps came down quickly, and when she saw my face, hers tightened. "What?" she asked. I pointed. She crouched and looked behind the washer. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She stood up and whispered, "What the hell?" We looked at each other, both suddenly aware of how loud our breathing was. Maybe squatters," she whispered. I nodded, but my mind was already racing through details. The grocery receipt, the carpet outline, the insulation bits. Someone had been living here. Possibly still living here. We didn't shout. We didn't search the house like heroes. We did the most human thing. We went quiet. We walked slowly toward the front door, trying not to sound like prey. Halfway down the hall, we heard a floorboard creak upstairs. My cousin's eyes widened. Another creak. A slow step. Then another. Someone was moving, not rushing, not panicking, just adjusting their position, like they'd been listening and deciding what to do. I grabbed my cousin's wrist and pulled her toward the door. We reached it, and my fingers fumbled on the lock. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't feel the key properly. Behind us, the upstairs creaks stopped. Silence. The door opened, and we slipped out onto the porch. We didn't run. We walked quickly to the car, because running feels like admitting the chase has started. We got in and locked the doors. Only then did we breathe. My cousin pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Call the police," she said. I did. We waited in the car, watching the house. Minutes passed. Then, very slowly, the curtain in the upstairs window moved. Just a little. Not a dramatic pull, a tiny shift, like a finger lifting it enough to see. I held my breath. A face appeared in that gap, looking down at us. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't twisted. It looked tired, blank, like a person who'd been living quietly and didn't want to be noticed. The face stayed there for a long moment, studying us. Then it disappeared. The curtain fell back into place. When the police arrived, they went inside. We stayed outside, wrapped in the cold air of fear, even though it was afternoon. After a while, an officer came out and asked us questions. We told them about the sleeping pad, the receipt, the attic hatch. He nodded. He looked tired, too, like this was more common than people think. They searched the house. They found signs someone had been there. Food wrappers, a bottle of water, a makeshift toilet bucket in the attic. But they didn't find the person. Maybe they left out the back, the officer said. There was no back door open, no broken window, no obvious escape. The officer shrugged, like the house itself had swallowed them. When we finally drove away, my cousin kept glancing in the rearview mirror. "What if they followed us?" she whispered. I wanted to say they wouldn't. I wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't stop thinking about that face in the upstairs window. Not angry, not scared, just watching, like we were the intrusion. That night, when I got home, I checked every lock twice. I looked behind my shower curtain. I checked my closets. I felt ridiculous until I remembered the sleeping pad behind the washer. The way someone can be in a home without making noise. The way they can survive on quiet and patience. And I kept thinking about something else, too. How many houses sit empty for months, waiting for a new owner? How many of them aren't actually empty? I used to take long walks at night when I couldn't sleep. Not in dangerous places, not down dark alleys, just through my neighborhood, under streetlights, on sidewalks where you could hear other people's TVs through their windows. I liked the feeling of the world still existing while I felt disconnected from it, like I could borrow someone else's calm by walking past their lit living rooms. One night, I noticed a car, a dark sedan parked on the corner near my building. It wasn't unusual, people parked there all the time. But the next night, it was there again, same spot. The third night, it was there again. At first, it was just a pattern. Then it became a question. I started noting its details. Small dent in the rear bumper. A sticker on the back window. Faded. The car always looked clean, like someone cared about it. One night, I walked past it and glanced inside. The interior was empty, but the driver's seat looked slightly reclined, like someone sat in it for long stretches. I kept walking, trying not to let my mind build stories. On the fifth night, as I passed the car again, the brake lights flashed faintly, not fully on. Just a small flicker, like someone had touched the pedal. My stomach tightened. I sped up without running. As I walked, I tried to listen behind me without turning my head. Footsteps, a door opening, anything. Nothing. When I got home, I stood at my apartment window and looked down at the corner. The car was still there. Its headlights were off. But in the driver's seat, I saw a faint shape, like someone sitting very still. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding. The next day, I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself maybe it was someone waiting for a partner who worked nights. Maybe it was a rideshare driver on break. But the car kept appearing, night after night. I started changing my route, taking different streets. going out earlier, going out later. The car always seemed to be there when I returned, parked in a way that gave it a clear view of my building entrance. One evening, I decided to test something. I left my apartment, walked toward the corner, and then, instead of passing the car, I turned sharply and walked into the small park across the street. I sat on a bench under a streetlight and pretended to scroll on my phone. From that angle, I could see the sedan clearly. At first, nothing happened. Then, after a few minutes, the car's interior light flicked on briefly. A figure moved inside. Then the interior light went off. The driver's door didn't open. The engine didn't start. It was as if the person inside had adjusted their posture, like they'd been watching me and needed a better angle. I sat there for 20 minutes, my stomach in a tight knot, trying to decide what kind of danger this was. Finally, I stood and walked back toward my building, taking the long way around so I wouldn't pass the car directly. As I approached the entrance, I heard the faint click of a car door closing. I didn't look. I just kept walking, trying to make my movements look normal. Inside the lobby, my building smelled like someone's cooking and old carpet. Normal. I waited by the mailboxes, pretending to check mail I knew wasn't there, just to see if someone would enter behind me. No one did. Up in my apartment, I stood at the window again. The sedan was still there, but now the driver's seat was empty. The next night, I didn't go for a walk. I stayed inside and watched the corner from my window. Around midnight, I saw a person approach the sedan and get in. They moved quickly, like they didn't want to be seen. They started the engine, but didn't drive away. They just sat. Then, after 10 minutes, they got out and walked away down the street, disappearing into shadows between streetlights. My throat went dry. It didn't make sense. If you're using a car to watch someone, why leave it? Unless the car wasn't the watching point. Unless the car was the cover. The next day, I asked my building manager if there had been any incidents. Any complaints? He shrugged. Not really, he said. Why? Nothing. I lied. That afternoon, I installed another camera. This time, I aimed it out my window toward the street. That night, I watched the feed. At 1:37 a.m., a person walked up to the sedan and opened the trunk. They pulled out something long and thin, like a folding tripod. They carried it to the sidewalk and set it up in the shadow of a tree facing my building. My breath stopped. They adjusted it carefully. Then they stepped back and looked up at my windows. I realized sickly that they weren't just sitting in the car. They were recording. I called the police. By the time they arrived, the person was gone, and the tripod was gone. The sedan was still there, parked innocently. The officers took my statement. They asked if I had footage. I showed them the clip. One officer watched it twice, face tightening. That's unusual, he said. Can you run the plates? I asked. They did. The result made my stomach sink. The car belonged to a rental company. Not stolen, not registered to a person. Just a rented vehicle, swapped out easily, the officer said. We'll patrol the area. If you see them again, call. After they left, I sat in the dark of my living room, watching the street through my blinds like I was hiding from a storm. The sedan stayed there for 3 more nights. Then it disappeared. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. But the relief didn't last, because a week later a different car appeared. Different color, different model, same corner, same angle toward my building. And that's when I understood something that made me cold all the way through. It wasn't about the car. It was about the spot. A viewing point. A line of sight. A place where someone could sit and watch. And if anyone asked, they were just parked. I moved again after that. I didn't tell my neighbors. I didn't tell my friends the full truth. I just packed and left, like I'd done before. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I stop at a red light, I catch myself looking at the cars around me, wondering which ones are just cars and which ones are rooms with someone inside, quiet and patient, learning your patterns. The last time it happened, at least, the last time I can put into words, was in a place that should have been the safest, my own memory. I started noticing gaps, not huge blackouts, not I woke up in another city kind of gaps, just missing edges. I'd drive to the grocery store and not remember the turn I took to get there, even though I'd made that drive 100 times. I'd find my phone plugged in on the other side of the room and not remember moving it. I'd open my notes app and see a sentence typed that I didn't remember writing. At first, I blamed stress. Trauma does that, they say. Your mind goes soft around certain moments. But the gaps became patterns, and patterns are hard to ignore once you see them. One morning I woke up and my front door was unlocked. Not open, unlocked. I stood there in my pajamas, staring at the deadbolt turned the wrong way. I knew I'd locked it. I always locked it. Locking it had become part of my body. I locked it again, hands shaking, and spent the day trying not to think about it. That evening, I opened my laptop and saw my browser history. There were searches I didn't remember making. How to disable camera indicator light, apartment ceiling access panel, white tape door frame meaning. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt. My hands went cold. I didn't search those things. Those searches were too specific, too close to my life, too close to the details that had haunted me. The next thought came in, slow and horrible. Unless I did, unless part of me, some quiet part, was doing things while the rest of me tried to live normally. I closed the laptop hard, like that would close the idea. I tried to be rational. Could someone have hacked my computer? Could someone have used it while I was gone? But my apartment showed no signs of entry. My cameras showed nothing unusual. My door indicators stayed intact. Then, one night, I woke up with a sensation that someone was in the room. That classic feeling, yes, but this wasn't a creak or a shadow. It was more intimate, like waking up mid-conversation and realizing someone had been speaking softly near your ear. My heart pounded. I sat up and listened. Silence. But my throat felt raw, like I'd been whispering. I got up and went to the bathroom. In the mirror, my eyes looked wrong. Too bright, too awake. On the sink counter, there was a strip of white tape, fresh, folded neatly in half, like a bookmark. I stared at it and felt something inside me drop, like an elevator losing a floor. I hadn't seen tape in months, not since my dad's doorframe. Why was it here? I picked it up. The adhesive stuck to my fingers, warm from the room. Then I noticed something else. My bathroom trash can had been emptied. I knew because I'd meant to take it out and hadn't. It should have been full of tissues and cotton pads. But it was empty, lined with a fresh bag. I didn't do that. I sat on the bathroom floor and tried to think through my last day. Work, grocery store, dinner, shower, bed. Nothing unusual. But my memory felt like a book with pages stuck together. I could see the chapter titles, but not the lines inside. I called in sick to work the next day. I made an appointment with a doctor, I told myself. It was anxiety, sleepwalking, dissociation, anything that gave me a label I could hold. In the waiting room, I filled out paperwork with shaking hands. When the nurse called my name, I felt like I was walking into an exam for my own sanity. The doctor asked me questions in a calm voice about stress, about sleep, about substances, about trauma. I told the truth, mostly. I didn't mention the man in the basement. I didn't mention the lobby chair that was empty when someone else looked. I didn't mention tape on door frames. I talked about the gaps. The doctor nodded. It could be stress, he said. It could be sleep-related. Let's start with sleep hygiene. Let's do some tests. He said it kindly, but I heard what he didn't say. There's no obvious monster here. When I got home, my apartment felt different. Not changed in an obvious way, but observed. Like the air itself remembered me leaving and returning. I checked my cameras. No alerts. I checked my door. Locked. I checked under the sink. Closed. Then I sat at my table and opened my notes app. There was a new note. No title. Just a single line, typed at 3:33 a.m. You keep trying to make it one thing. I stared at it until tears filled my eyes, not because it was threatening, but because it felt like someone had reached into the private space of my confusion and touched it gently, like they understood. My hands shook as I scrolled to see if there was more. There wasn't. I deleted the note. Then I sat there and realized I didn't know if deleting it mattered. I didn't know if I'd written it. I didn't know if someone else had. I didn't know if the fear was outside me or inside me, or both. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I set my phone to record audio while I slept. I placed it on my nightstand and pressed record and lay down, staring at the ceiling. I told myself I'd wake up and hear nothing, just breathing. Maybe a cough. Maybe the refrigerator clicking on. Morning came. My mouth felt dry. My head ached. I stopped the recording and listened. At first, it was just the sound of sheets shifting, the soft exhale of sleep. Then, around 3:30 a.m., there was a sound. My voice. Quiet, whispering. I turned the volume up with trembling fingers. I couldn't make out all the words at first, but then my ears adjusted and my skin went cold. I was saying over and over, softly, "Not the door, not the door, not the door." Then a pause, then a different sound, not my voice, a breath that wasn't mine, very close to the microphone. And then, in the same calm tone I'd used, my voice said, one final thing. "It's okay. Stay there." I stopped the audio and sat in silence so complete it felt like my apartment had become a vacuum. Because those words weren't random. They were Aaron's words in the basement. They were the words I'd heard through the stairs. It's okay. Stay there. I didn't remember saying them, but my voice said them anyway. I sat for a long time staring at the wall, trying to understand what it meant when your own mouth can repeat something you never consented to learn. I don't have a neat ending for any of this. No satisfying explanation. No arrest, no confession, no final scene where the camera reveals a simple truth. I moved again, of course. I changed routines. I stopped walking at night. I stopped trusting quiet. But the weird thing about fear like this is that it doesn't go away when you change addresses, because the scariest part isn't the car on the corner, or the tape on the door frame, or the hand in the wall. It's the idea that something can be close to you, close enough to learn you, without ever needing to announce itself. And when you finally turn off the lights and try to sleep, you start to wonder whether the safest place is really the room you're in, or the version of your memory you can still trust.